An older woman who pulls her bag to her chest and says nothing. He reaches Bruce Lee and applies the same pressure, the same lateral push with the shoulder, the same wordless assumption that the smaller body will yield to the larger one, because that is simply how the physics of public spaces work. Bruce does not move. He shifts his weight slightly, rotates his body perhaps 2 or 3 degrees, and the push finds no purchase, no leverage, no compliance. He continues looking toward the counter as though nothing has touched him, because in any meaningful sense, nothing has. The bodybuilder stops. He has not encountered this before, not in this situation, not from someone this size. He looks at Bruce with the expression of a man whose simple arithmetic has just produced an impossible result, and who is not yet sure whether to recalculate or insist on his original answer. Hey, I need to get through. Big guy coming. Move it. Bruce does not turn around immediately. He continues facing forward. When he does turn, he does so slowly and completely, giving the bodybuilder his full attention with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who is not afraid of what they are turning to face. He looks up at the man from behind his sunglasses for a moment, then removes the sunglasses and folds them into his jacket pocket with the same careful economy he applies to everything. The line is for everyone, Bruce says. His voice is calm and perfectly level, not loud, not aggressive, simply clear. The way of fact is clear. Wait your turn. The bodybuilder blinks. He has expected one of several responses from the smaller man. Compliance, apology, nervous laughter, the immediate physical yielding that his size normally produces without requiring words. He has not expected this. The calmness of it is more disorienting than aggression would have been. He looks at Bruce for a moment, then at his own arms, then back at Bruce, running the comparison that his mind has been trained by 6 years of gym culture to run automatically. He sees 140 pounds, maybe 150 with the jacket. He sees arms that are functional but not impressive. He sees someone who should, by every physical metric he has learned to trust, be moving out of his way right now. Buddy, he says, and his voice carries the patronizing patience of a man explaining something obvious to someone slow. I'm twice your size. Move, or I'll move you. Bruce responds without changing his expression, without raising his voice, without shifting his weight in any way that could be read as preparation for violence. He simply says, try. One word, not a threat. An invitation. A door opened with perfect courtesy into a room the bodybuilder is not equipped to enter. The airline employee at the counter intervenes at this point, as airline employees are trained to do, with the specific combination of authority and appeasement that customer service requires. Gentlemen, please. There are no confrontations here. Everyone will be served in order. Please maintain your positions in the queue. The bodybuilder steps back. His ego is not injured yet, merely delayed. He positions himself behind Bruce and waits with the specific impatience of a man who has decided he will find another opportunity to establish the hierarchy that this small, unreasonable person has temporarily disrupted. The opportunity presents itself when Bruce reaches the counter and places his suitcase on the scale. The suitcase is not fully latched because Bruce had been organizing documents in it while waiting and had not resecured the clasp completely. The bodybuilder, standing directly behind him, sees this. What happens next is technically possible to describe as an accident. A large foot moving clumsily in a crowded space, making contact with luggage on the floor. That is one description. The other description is that the bodybuilder deliberately drives his foot into the side of Bruce's suitcase with enough force to knock it off the scale and send it skidding across the linoleum, the unlatched clasp giving way, the contents spilling across the terminal floor. 2 shirts, a pair of training trousers, personal items, spreading across the floor of San Francisco International Airport on a Saturday morning in September 1972, while 40 people watch and the bodybuilder laughs out loud. The specific laugh of a man who has found a way to assert dominance while maintaining plausible deniability. Then he says it. He turns to his companion and says it at a volume calculated to reach Bruce and everyone within 10 meters without quite becoming a shout. Look at the little Chinese guy picking up his garbage. Should learn not to be in the way of bigger people. The companion laughs. A few other people nearby look away. The airline employee behind the counter goes very still. Bruce Lee does not react visibly. He kneels down on the linoleum floor of the terminal and begins picking up his clothing with movements that are deliberate and unhurried. The movements of a man who has decided exactly how he is going to respond to this situation and is in no rush to get there. He folds the first shirt carefully, as though he is in his bedroom at home with nowhere to be. He folds the second. He places the training trousers on top. He picks up each personal item individually and places it back in the suitcase. The bodybuilder's laughter continues for a while, and then begins to thin at the edges as the silence from Bruce stretches longer than expected. The laughter requires a reaction to sustain itself. Bruce is not providing one. The bodybuilder fills the silence with another comment. Something to his companion about how some people just don't understand that the world has a natural order. But the words have less conviction than before. Bruce finishes repacking his suitcase. He stands up. He closes the clasp with a clean, decisive click. He turns and faces the bodybuilder directly with the complete, unhurried attention of someone who has finished everything they needed to finish and now has time for this. The 40 people in the surrounding area who have been watching this unfold go completely quiet. The airline employee behind the counter stops typing. Even the ambient noise of the terminal seems to pull back slightly, the way sound behaves in a large space when something is about to happen that demands attention. Bruce speaks clearly and without performance, projecting his voice not through volume, but through precision, each word landing exactly where it is aimed. "You're going to apologize," he says, "or I'm going to demonstrate why size without skill is just dead weight." He says it the way a physician states a diagnosis, not as a threat, as an assessment of the available facts. The bodybuilder stares at him for a long moment. He runs the calculation again. 140 pounds, 5 feet 7 inches, arms that are not particularly impressive. He has done this calculation before, and it has always produced the same answer, and the answer has always been correct, and there is no reason, no physical reason that he can identify why this situation should be any different. He decides the situation is not different. He smiles at his companion. Then he takes one step toward Bruce and extends his right hand toward Bruce's chest, open-palmed. The dominant push that establishes hierarchy without technically crossing into assault. The move that has ended a dozen minor confrontations in his favor without ever He decides the situation is not different. He smiles at his companion. Then he takes one step toward Bruce and extends his right hand toward Bruce's chest, open-palmed. The dominant push that establishes hierarchy without technically crossing into assault. The move that has ended a dozen minor confrontations in his favor without ever requiring him to actually fight anyone. The hand never reaches Bruce's chest. What happens in the next 5 seconds is this. In the first second, Bruce's left hand intercepts the incoming push at the wrist, not blocking it with force, but redirecting it outward in a motion so smooth and economical that several witnesses later describe it as looking like the bodybuilder's own arm simply changed its mind about where it was going. In the second second, Bruce's right leg generates a side kick that travels from its chambered position to the bodybuilder's solar plexus in a time that the human eye cannot follow reliably. The power in that kick is not generated by the size of the muscles involved. It is generated by the kinetic chain. Legs pushing against the floor, hips rotating, torso contracting. All of it channeling momentum through the extended leg into a contact point, approximately 2 inches square, at the precise anatomical location where the impact will be most efficiently transferred to the diaphragm. Bruce's 140 pounds, when focused through that chain into that point, exceeds anything that 265 pounds of untrained mass can produce in a comparable movement. In the third second, the impact reaches the bodybuilder's diaphragm. The diaphragm goes into spasm. The bodybuilder's mouth opens. No sound comes out because no air is moving in his direction. His hands go instinctively to his midsection, the ancient reflex of a body trying to protect the site of injury after the injury has already occurred. In the fourth second, Bruce's left leg sweeps the bodybuilder's support leg at the precise moment when all 265 pounds of the man's weight is committed to that leg due to the destabilization caused by the kick.
Now fuck up and move that.
The geometry is simple. Remove the only remaining support at the moment when the center of gravity is already displaced. And the result is not a fall, it is a collapse. Total and immediate and inevitable. In the fifth second, 265 pounds of bodybuilder meets the linoleum floor of San Francisco International Airport with an impact that travels through the terminal like a minor geological event, reverberating in the bones of every person standing within 20 feet. He lands on his back, arms and legs extended without control, completely conscious and completely unable to do anything about his situation, which is the floor, the inability to breathe, and the 40 people watching him from above. Bruce Lee does not follow him to the ground. He does not stand over him. He does not say anything. He turns back to the airline counter, picks up his suitcase, and addresses the agent, who is standing with both hands flat on the counter, and an expression that suggests her training did not include a protocol for this specific situation. "Excuse the interruption," Bruce says. "My bag is within the weight limit." The agent looks at the scale. "Yes?" she says, in a voice that is operating on automatic pilot, while her conscious mind catches up with what it just witnessed. 42 pounds, well within the limit. She prints the boarding pass. Her hands are not entirely steady, but she manages it. Bruce takes the pass, thanks her, and walks toward the seating area with the unhurried calm of a man who has completed his check-in and has some time before his flight. Behind him, the bodybuilder is beginning the slow process of recovering the ability to breathe. It takes almost 2 full minutes before he can sit up. His companion is crouched beside him, asking questions that the bodybuilder cannot yet answer because answering requires air, and air is still arriving in shallow, painful increments. When he finally gets vertical, assisted by his companion's arm, he looks around the terminal for Bruce. Not with the intention of continuing anything. With the expression of a man who has just had a fundamental assumption about the world corrected in the most direct way available, and is still in the early stages of processing the correction. He had believed for 6 years that 265 pounds of muscle was a reliable source of dominance in physical confrontations. That belief is gone. It has been removed with the same efficiency and economy with which everything else just happened. What replaces it is not yet clear to him. That will take longer. But the absence of the old belief is already complete. Three people approach Bruce in the waiting area before boarding begins. The first is a karate instructor in a business suit, a man in his mid-40s who has spent 15 years teaching martial arts in San Jose and who introduces himself with the specific deference of a professional encountering someone operating at a level above his own. Mr. Lee, he says, I have been teaching for 15 years, and I have never seen a more perfect demonstration of economy of movement. The sidekick was instantaneous, and the timing of the sweep was precise beyond anything I could explain to my students without showing them that exact sequence. Would you be willing to tell me what system that was? Bruce responds with the genuine humility of someone who has thought carefully about these questions for a long time. It wasn't a specific system, he says. It was the application of principles. Intercept the attack during preparation, before it has generated momentum. Strike the center of mass at the point where damage is maximized. Use the opponent's committed weight against him with the sweep. Those principles work regardless of the system you practice. The system is the vehicle. The principles are what actually function. The instructor nods slowly, writing something in a small notebook he has produced from his jacket pocket. Bruce watches him write with an expression of quiet satisfaction.
Stupid!
A teacher who has found a student paying genuine attention. The second person is a young woman, perhaps 25, who had been standing directly behind Bruce in the check-in queue, and who approaches him with the slightly unsteady quality of someone whose adrenaline is still processing. I needed to see that, she says. That man was intimidating everyone in that line. The way he pushed past people, his comments, his whole attitude, he was treating every person in that queue like they were obstacles. I was preparing myself for when he reached me, because I knew he was going to push me too. She pauses. Thank you for not accepting it. Not just for yourself. Bruce looks at her for a moment before responding. I didn't do it to be a hero, he says. I did it because that behavior, casual racism, using physical size to intimidate people who are smaller, the assumption that you can take what you want because you're large enough to take it, those things corrode something important. They replace respect with fear. And a culture based on fear is worse for everyone in it, including the people doing the intimidating, because they never learn what they actually are without the intimidation propping them up. The woman is quiet for a moment. What is he without it? She asks. Less than he thinks, Bruce says, which is the real lesson. Not what happened to him on the floor. What he discovers next. The third person is an older man, perhaps 65, who moves with the particular economy of someone who has carried serious weight for a long time and has learned to move efficiently with it. He identifies himself as a Korean War veteran, and his voice carries the specific texture of a man who has seen enough of human capacity for violence to have formed real opinions about it. Son, he says, and the word comes without condescension. It is simply the word he uses for men younger than himself, who have earned his attention. I saw combat in Korea. All kinds, rifles, knives, hand-to-hand in conditions that I won't describe in an airport. What you did just now was textbook effective. Minimum force required.
Okay.
Maximum effect. Clean termination of threat, without escalation beyond the point of necessity. You stopped when the threat was neutralized. You didn't continue. He pauses, looking at Bruce with the direct assessment of someone who evaluates these things professionally, even decades after the profession ended. That kind of discipline is rarer than the technique, he says. Most men who can fight keep fighting past the point of necessity because the adrenaline demands it. You stopped on a dime. Bruce receives this for a moment before responding. The goal in real confrontation is never to destroy the opponent, he says. The goal is to end the threat. The moment the threat ends, continuing is no longer defense. It becomes something else. And that something else creates problems, legal and moral, that the original defense did not create. The discipline of stopping is as important as the skill of acting. 15 minutes before boarding, 2 airport security officers approach Bruce in the waiting area. The senior officer, a man in his 40s with the expression of someone who has genuinely seen everything in 2 decades of airport work, identifies himself and explains that they have received a report of a physical altercation in the check-in area and that multiple witnesses have named Bruce. He asks for an account of what happened. Bruce provides one without embellishment or omission in the same level tone he uses for everything.
Hello, this is
The implosion in the queue. The deliberate kick to the suitcase. The racist comment delivered at sufficient volume for 10 people to hear clearly. The attempted dominant push and his response to it. The officer takes notes and asks Bruce to wait while they speak with witnesses.
All right.
Bye.
Yes, sir. And lock my number in. We'll be talking again soon.
Okay, that will do. Bye.
All right. Yes, sir.
The implosion in the queue.
Boop, she's cute.
The deliberate kick to the
There's
suitcase.
another girl that's cute.
The implosion
With a spit person.
in the queue. The deliberate kick to the suitcase. The racist comment delivered at sufficient volume for 10 people to hear clearly. The attempted dominant push and his response to it. The officer takes notes and asks Bruce to wait while they speak with witnesses. They speak with 6. They return after 10 minutes, and the senior officer's expression has shifted slightly towards something that could be described as professional respect. Every witness confirms your account, he says. Multiple people describe the other individual as the clear aggressor and confirm that you made verbal attempts at resolution before any physical contact occurred. You are technically within your rights to file assault charges against him. Bruce considers this for a moment, genuinely, not as performance. No, he says, finally. I want to take my flight. If he learned something today, that is sufficient. The point of the situation was the lesson, not the punishment. The bodybuilder did not file charges. His companion explained to the security officers, in a tone that carried the specific embarrassment of someone managing a situation they want to end, that his friend had decided not to pursue the matter. The real reason, which the companion did not state, but which the security officers understood from context, was that the bodybuilder could not construct a version of the story that did not require explaining how he had ended up on the floor of the terminal after attempting to push a man who weighed 60 pounds less than he did. Any version of that story that he told in any official capacity would follow him. So he said nothing. He and his companion took a later flight. The bodybuilder spent the entire journey in silence, looking out the window at the clouds over California, turning over the 5 seconds in a mind that was not yet equipped to fully process them, but would keep returning to them for years. Years later, a bodybuilding magazine published an anonymous interview with a competitor who described learning the difference between aesthetic strength and functional strength through a public confrontation that humiliated him in front of 40 strangers. He described the experience not with bitterness, but with the rueful honesty of a man who had been given an education he didn't ask for and couldn't refuse. I had spent 6 years building a body that looked dangerous, he said. I found out in 5 seconds that looking dangerous and being dangerous are completely different things. The man who taught me that lesson didn't say a word afterward. He just picked up his boarding pass and walked away. That was the part that stayed with me the longest. Not the technique. The fact that, for him, it was just something that needed to be dealt with, like checking a bag. Something routine. I had been walking around for 6 years, thinking my size made me special in a fight. For him, my size was just a Tuesday morning at the airport. He went on to describe beginning boxing training the following month, not to become a fighter, but to understand the difference between muscle that performs and muscle that functions, between the body as display and the body as instrument. The training, he said, changed everything about how he understood himself and how he moved through the world. Bruce spoke about the incident 3 months later in an interview with Black Belt magazine when asked about the difference between gymnasium strength and functional combat strength. His answer was characteristically direct and carried the quality of someone who has thought about a question for 20 years and has arrived at the clearest possible version of the answer. Large muscle can generate force in isolated movements, he said. Bench press, curl, squat. Those are impressive in their context. But combat is not isolated movement. Combat is kinetic chain, the entire body coordinating in fractions of a second. Each segment contributing to a total force that exceeds what any single muscle group could produce alone. The man at the airport could almost certainly bench press 300 pounds. That is genuinely impressive. But he could not generate meaningful force in a sidekick because he had never trained the kinetic chain of a kick. His muscle was present. His nervous system did not know how to use it in that context. The muscle was there. The coordination was absent. And in the 5 seconds that mattered, coordination was the only thing that mattered. He paused before continuing, the pause of someone choosing words with care. People train their bodies to look strong because strength that is visible gets a response. In the gym, in public, in the mirror. That response feels like power. But visible strength and functional strength are related the way a photograph of a fire is related to an actual fire. One looks like the thing. One is the thing. At the airport that morning, he brought a photograph. I brought a fire. 5 seconds. That is the number that defines this story and the reason it travels. 5 seconds from the moment the bodybuilder extended his hand to push until he was on the floor of San Francisco International Airport, unable to breathe. 5 seconds that contained within them the entire argument between size and skill, between mass and precision, between the body as intimidation and the body as instrument. 5 seconds that taught 40 witnesses something about the difference between looking powerful and being powerful, something that most of them had sensed in the abstract, but had never seen demonstrated with such clarity in such a public and ordinary place. A check-in queue on a Saturday morning, a gray suitcase, a boarding pass, a man who had somewhere to be and simply needed to deal with something that was in the way before he got there. The bodybuilder brought everything he had built in 6 years of daily work. Bruce Lee brought 20 years of daily work. The difference between those two kinds of work was visible in 5 seconds in a way that no amount of explanation could have made as clear. And 50 years later, every time someone in a gym confuses the size of a muscle with the capability of the body that contains it, the lesson is still waiting to be learned. Some lessons require a certain kind of teacher. Some teachers appear in airports on Saturday mornings, wearing leather jackets, carrying gray suitcases, waiting patiently in line for their turn at the counter, and dealing with whatever needs to be dealt with before the flight departs, quietly, completely, and then moving on.
fucking Christ. Jesus goddamn cunt fucking Christ. Do. Fucking Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. Oh, fucking goddamn fucking Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. Now fuck up and bring this phone down here. Now fuck up and take that goddamn phone. God damn it. Dumbass. I fucked his whole
election. Some evangelical Christians began comparing Donald Trump to King Cyrus.
15 when I first met Trump. I met him at the Trump Towers. And at that time I ran across Isaiah 45 and I said, oh my gosh, this guy is like the character Cyrus in the Bible. In that he's a deliverer who God raises up prophetically. Isaiah is prophesying a future deliverer named Cyrus. And he's not even Jewish. And I said, this is going to really, and I wrote this in a book. I said, Trump derangement will happen. Because I used the term before it was popularized. And I said, because this guy has a Cyrus quality.
It doesn't matter that he's an evil person. He's going to stop people from having reproductive rights and tell trans people where they can poop. He's going to let pastors tell people who to vote for.
We got rid of the Sinister Johnson Amendment so that pastors can speak the truth and they can speak it without having their tax-exempt status screwed up.
Yeah, transgender people do not belong.
It's not really a surprise that evangelicals and other Christian groups keep defending Trump. Covering up for and protecting abusers is kind of like one of their main things.
Today's question is, why is it sinful for a church to cover up abuse? In this video, I'll answer that question from a biblical perspective.
Did somebody actually ask that? Was somebody actually sitting there thinking, what's so bad about church cover-ups? Is there actually something wrong with that?
Actively hiding, disguising, or keeping a mistake or sin hidden rather than correcting it is referred to as a cover-up. The church should not be involved in cover-ups. Anyone with knowledge of abuse or who suspects abuse is morally obligated to act on such information.
And put your garbage in a garbage can, people. I can't stress that enough. Don't just throw it out the window.
To act on such information.
And put your garbage in a garbage can, people. I can't stress that enough. Don't just
My garbage
throw it out
can
the
is
window.
the city of Kiss.
Garbage in garbage can. Makes sense.
Unfortunately, way too many churches don't understand that, yes, garbage goes in the garbage can.
God damn it.
And obviously we have the Catholic Church cover-ups.
Sometimes the dioceses have finally released names. In other cases, they have not been forthcoming. And some of the highest leaders of the church have resigned or been removed.
And the huge cover-ups at America's largest Protestant denomination, the Southern Baptists.
Investigation found that despite having a list of more than 700 potentially abusive pastors, Southern Baptist leaders having a list of
His largest Protestant denomination, the Southern Baptists.
Investigation found that despite having a list of more than 700 potentially abusive pastors, Southern Baptist leaders chose to protect their denomination from lawsuits rather than help victims. This is a case that strikes right here in Memphis. There are 125 Southern Baptist churches in the city alone.
To survivors, the 2016 election of Steve Gaines as SBC president conveyed the message that a clergy abuse cover-up was considered no big deal in the SBC. It goes on to say, as senior pastor at Bellevue Baptist Church in Memphis, in 2006, Gaines had kept quiet for months after he learned about a staff minister's prior sexual abuse of a child.
For far too long, the knee-jerk reaction of these pastors and churches have been to cover up abuse in order to save face, to protect their brand, or protect somebody in their life, regardless of who may get hurt.
The court documents charging a Vernon pastor with sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl.
She spit. Wow, she smells like spit. With spit. With spit. With spit. God damn it. Oozy spit. Oozy spit.
Girl alleges he groomed her for sex by counseling her at church and providing her with meth. The pastor at Vernon's First Assembly of God and a chaplain at Tyson's Food.
Wait, he was a chaplain at Tyson Foods? Why does the chicken nugget place need a chaplain?
Was arrested Friday in Wichita Falls following an investigation led by Vernon's police and the 46th District Attorney's Office and the Texas Rangers. Police were notified on July 1st that the victim's mother was trying to locate her daughter at the Lone Star Inn on US 287. An officer went to the motel and said he found Pounds there, and that Pounds told him he was there trying to get a room for a person in need. The officer learned Pounds had rented a room there under the name of the First Assembly of God Church.
So like they said there, this pastor was part of the Assemblies of God denomination. the world's largest Pentecostal denomination. And they have had their fair share of abuse themselves, especially in their college campus ministry, Chi Alpha.
Daniel Savala was once revered by followers, but for decades he allegedly abused teens and young men who were brought to him through Chi Alpha, a college campus ministry run by the Assemblies of God.
I knew that I was wrong.
Savala actually confessed on a video obtained by NBC News. He's now in jail facing criminal charges and has not entered a plea. Now the leadership of the Assemblies of God is speaking out.
There are no words that can capture the sorrow we feel for those targeted and impacted by this.
You can say you're sad and disappointed all you want, but those words mean nothing when you could have stopped it, but did nothing.
She was scared and told her mom everything. She says her mother went to the head pastor, Mike Glover, with the disturbing details.
And then what happened after that meeting? Tony was suspended. And then, he was back.
That's been a pattern in Assemblies of God churches. NBC News identified nearly 200 Assemblies of God pastors, church employees, and volunteer leaders accused of sexual abuse over the past 50 years. Together, they allegedly abused more than 475 people, most of them kids.
In about 30 cases that NBC News found, church leaders put alleged abusers in positions of power, allowing them to abuse again.
Nearly 2 years after Stephanie says her mom reported the children's pastor, Tony Waller, Courtney Blackburn says he started visiting her house when her mom was at work.
And this is your bedroom?
Mm-hmm. She says Waller brought bags of clothes for her to try on and keep.
Let me touch her head.
She says Waller brought bags of clothes for her to try on and keep. One day, when she was changing in her bedroom, she stopped cold.
I got about this far with my top and I seen it, and I stopped, I froze.
And you see what?
The video camera sitting on my top.
I want to take a few moments to address the recent NBC News article. Abuse of any kind has no place in the Assemblies of God. Abuse against minors is especially reprehensible and unconscionable. But the report published by NBC News is profoundly disappointing because it's peppered with misleading information. The Assemblies of God grieves with anyone who's been hurt by the actions of an abuser. One instance of abuse is too many. And the General Council of the Assemblies of God is committed to child safety and has an established track record of leadership in this area. So first off, let me be clear. A position of zero tolerance for credentialed ministers guilty of sexual misconduct against a minor has been in place for decades.
Besides, you should have made your protest months ago. These plans have been on display at the planning office now for a year.
On display? I had to go down to a cellar.
For NBC to suggest that the General Council does not require background checks, screening for credentialed ministers, or that we don't follow required background checks, screening for credentialed ministers, or that we don't follow mandatory reporting is absolutely false. Background checks and verified references are an established part of our credential process. The General Council also voluntarily considers itself a mandatory reporter, even when it is not required to by law.
And by way of example, in the case of Tony Waller, the NBC report implies no action was taken by the Assemblies of God officials. However, when the District Council and General Council first became aware of his actions in 2015, he was promptly reported to state authorities, investigated, and dismissed per established processes.
I'm glad he was eventually prosecuted, but that should have happened the first time. He shouldn't have been allowed to go out and hurt more children. To make a defensive speech like this was such a bad idea. The anger should have been inward, and there should have been a lot of resignations and a lot of firings and a top-down change at the denomination. But instead they made this angry speech about fake news. But that's how these churches operate. Let's go back to that Chi Alpha situation.
John Blumenkemper Jr. was a member of Chi Alpha in Texas in the 90s. Years later, Blumenkemper learned that in 2012, Daniel Savala was charged with 11 counts of sexually abusing boys in Alaska. He pleaded guilty to 1 count and was a registered sex offender. Chi Alpha leaders in Texas rallied to his defense.
They raised money for him. They wrote letters to the judge
For his defense. Back in Houston, Chi Alpha members continued bringing young men and boys to see Savala. Over the next decade, at least 6 people alerted the Assemblies of God that Chi Alpha was exposing young people to a sex offender. NBC News found emails and phone calls were dismissed or ignored. In 2023, Blumenkemper launched his online forum.
Story after story of people saying, I told, they did nothing.
So it wasn't missed that he was a sex offender. It wasn't because of a lack of background checks. They knew, and they didn't care. They wanted him to be around more potential victims because they convinced themselves that this man was holy and that this man was sent from God, so they didn't care that he hurt children before, or they believed him when he told them that it was a lie, because they went with their feelings. They went with what they thought God was telling them, and there was no discipline for them not following the protocol. He was allowed to be around students and children for years after this.
Savala was first accused of sexually abusing minors in 2012. He was indicted. Savala was first accused of sexually abusing minors in 2012. He was indicted on 11 charges for allegedly assaulting a number of children in a youth group he led in Alaska in the 90s. He pleaded guilty to just 1 charge, spent 90 days in prison, and registered as a sex offender. Last year, he was accused of sexually abusing 2 teenage boys with a then Baylor University campus minister. The 2 were sent to the McLennan County Jail. But eventually, Savala was brought here to Harris County as more alleged victims started coming forward. In August, one young man reported that Savala had started assaulting him back in 2005 when he was in high school. He was also charged this February for allegedly exposing himself to another teen back in 2021.
He used it as part of his grooming process to normalize the sexual abuse, and he used religious text in order to make it seem normal.
Abusers are now in the Brazos County Jail. William Johnson, Otto Randolph, and Ryan Hoffert. According to the lawsuit, Johnson, Randolph, and Hoffert repeatedly sexually assaulted LH, who was 13 at the time. Hoffert also drove LH to Houston to be sexually assaulted by Daniel Savala, a registered sex offender who was viewed as a religious leader and mentor in the Chi Alpha chapter at Texas A&M and in Mountain Valley Fellowship. Savala was arrested at his home in Houston in May 2023. Because Savala has been a registered sex offender since 2013, the lawsuit claims negligence on the part of the local church and the General Council of the Assemblies of God, which is the national organization responsible for the Chi Alpha ministry.
And they always like to frame it as a couple bad apples, but it's not. They ignored warning after warning after warning. Listen to the General Superintendent or the CEO of the Assemblies of God describe this event.
Well, that God is raising up people who feel a call of God to go on to perhaps the greatest mission field here in the United States, and that's universities and campuses. And I get it. Along the spectrum and ministry lines, there are times when there are hiccups, there are times when there are shortcomings, there are times when there are failures. But the failure of some individuals never trumps the strength and the purpose and the vitality of the particular ministry.
He referred to it as a hiccup.
There are times when there are hiccups.
It wasn't a hiccup. It was sexual abuse. It was spiritual abuse. It was religious abuse and religious trauma. And worst of all, it was preventable abuse. The Assemblies of God is at fault here. This isn't just about a bad apple or a couple bad apples. This is something they need to take responsibility for. I've talked about John MacArthur before, many times. He actually died last July. But I don't believe in the idea that you shouldn't speak ill of the dead. Dying doesn't erase the harm you caused while you're alive.
It is a little strange that we have such an aversion to slavery because historically there have been abuses. Yeah, there have been abuses in marriage. We don't have an aversion to marriage, particularly, because there have been abuses. There are parents who abuse their children. We don't have an aversion to having children because some parents have been abusive. Of course, you can have any kind of situation where abuse can be involved. The reason unions grew up in America was not to free slaves. The reason unions grew up in America was because there were people who had businesses and they were abusing their employees. So to throw out slavery as a concept simply because there have been abuses, I think, is to miss the point.
In the early 2000s, a woman at his church, Grace Community Church, sought counseling because her and her children were being abused by her husband. The elders and the staff then promptly counseled her to get back together with her abuser. Anyone who's ever been in an abusive relationship or have loved ones who have been in an abusive relationship, you know how hard it is to get out of that abusive relationship. So then turning around and telling someone to get back together with their abuser is so irresponsible and so disgusting. But after a time of telling her to get back with her abuser and her refusing, she was kicked out of the church and John MacArthur made this speech.
Sad situation. A person who is unwilling to repent. The church bears responsibility before God to be the instrument of discipline. So a church discipline is outside of the head of the Lord. The Lord is the head of the church. He says in Matthew 18, when you do this, when you discipline, there are I in the midst of you. It's always a sad thing to do this, but this is bringing heaven down. This is what the Lord wants. He wants discipline. One of the forms of discipline he uses is to be put out of the church, to be publicly shamed, to be put away from fellowship. In this case, it applies to highly grade. That was David. I only been in the church for many years. So I told her that I decided to leave her husband, drink, no grace to him at all, to take children, to go away, to forsake him, not to reconcile, to reject all the instruction, counsel of the elders, all the instruction from the Word of God.
And it's a really good thing that she took the children, because David is now in jail for child sexual abuse. But at least after this happened, after he was arrested, a pastor at the church sent an email to the congregation letting them know that they were so sorry for their actions and condemned David Gray. Just kidding, nobody did that. This pastor sent an email to the congregation that this man was probably innocent and that Eileen was definitely crazy. To this day, people still defend Grace Community Church and John MacArthur. Because when they decide that somebody is a man of God, it is very hard to break that image of that man.
John MacArthur, one of my favorite Bible teachers, as some of you all may know. But in this instance, I'm not quite sold that he and his church actually handled it perfectly well. There was this woman whose name was Eileen Gray, and without going into all the details, her story surfaced after 20-some years, and apparently he publicly mentioned her name and maybe even shamed her in church.
Mentioned her name? The speech was about her. Maybe even shamed her? The speech was made specifically to shame her. Alan, this video is publicly available, and it was publicly available when you made this video.
Because she did not accept her husband back, and apparently he was abusive towards her and their children, but they didn't have all of the details.
They had all the details. They knew he was abusive. They just didn't care. She already had a restraining order against him. She already told them he was being abusive. Those are all the details you need. I mean, you didn't even need those details. If somebody says they want to leave their spouse, it's not up to anybody else but that person to decide what to do.
And so at the time, the details that they had led them to believe that she was in error because she did not accept her husband back and she was seeking to be separated from him.
Well, they believed she was in error because she's a woman and she wasn't listening to what they commanded her to do. That's what the error was.
Turns out that this guy actually was abusing them, and he actually got sentenced to 21 years of prison.
Wow, he said that part really fast.
Sentenced to 21 years of prison.
I don't believe that John MacArthur supports child abuse, or I don't think he supports in the sense that knowingly someone who is guilty of unrepentant, that John MacArthur would support that person in ministry or anything like that. I just don't think you can draw those conclusions.
Except for from all the facts that this man will share in this video.
Or that Grace Community Church, under his direction, would harbor. These are the kinds of conclusions that are being reached. So, and that's generally what happens when an article is put out there. Even if the article kind of approaches the ledge and doesn't quite jump off, the people who are reading it will then go the extra step, which is what I'm seeing.
Whether or not the man turned out to be a sex offender, or whether or not he was actually being abusive, it's still toxic. But he was doing those things. And they defended him until they couldn't defend him anymore.
Elaine Gray, the wife of David Gray at the time, approached the elders at Grace Community Church in 2001. On May 10th, she had filed a legal, there was an incident on May 10th, and then on May 11th, she filed a legal separation and obtained a restraining order the next day. So within 24 hours of an incident, and the incident concerned, according to her, abuse of one of the children, that David Gray was inflicting physical pain on them that was beyond what he should have. And
by the way, that number is 0. The amount of pain you should inflict on your children, that's 0.
And this event was eventually led in a very short period of time to legal separation and a restraining order. So then, shortly after this, she goes to, after filing these things, to the Grace Community Church elders, hoping they would protect her and her children and get David professional help, according to the article in question.
Motherfucking dick bitch.
Now, the Grace Community Church starts a process with her. First, it's inputted with Bill Shannon. Carrie Hardy becomes the counselor. But Grace Community Church warns Elaine Gray about discipline when she refuses to follow some of the counsel. Now, one thing I'm going to just point out things along the way that I think are important to remember. Just keep it in your mind. One important thing to remember here is that Elaine Gray was the one who initially requested counseling. So she really did think that whatever she knew at that time, and throughout the counseling process, they had, I think, jointly 8 or so counseling sessions. She believed that there was hope in some way, or there was some way to navigate the differences between the couple, or to get David help. It was a way to actually provide that kind of help and to the purpose of counseling, if you go to Grace Community Church, is going to be to restore the relationship, for the husband and wife to come back together as a family, to repair that relationship. And so she had some kind of, presumably, an intention to do just that.
But we already established that immediately. Her concern is about safety. She got a restraining order, and she asked for help from the church. He immediately assumes that the reason she asked for counsel was because she wanted to get back together with him, because he lives in an evangelical bubble, and he can't think of any other reason why an abused woman with abused children could possibly be asking for help. The only reason in his mind why she would ask for help is to get back together with the abuser.
Now, she refused, and we'll get into some of the details, but she refused to accept and to follow some of the direction from Carrie Hardy, especially concerning letting David Gray back in the house. And as a result of that, of refusing the counsel, Grace Community Church sent her multiple letters over several months in 2001 to 2002. The letters threatened Elaine, this is according to the article in question, with church discipline if she fails to comply with the elder's request to drop the protective order against David and take him. This leads to August 18th, 2002. John MacArthur announced the final step of church discipline. Now, the article claims that Elaine had not yet reported her husband's physical and mental abuse to police at this time. Important to remember that. That's another fact I want you to stick in your mind. So, number one, Elaine, with the hope, presumably, of restoring the relationship, approached Grace Community Church, wanted the counsel. They didn't force it on her. She wanted this. And she had not yet reported her husband's physical and mental abuse to police. Now,
she had a restraining order, and she told the church. The police report shouldn't affect whether or not they believed her. I don't know what this guy thought he was doing with this, because it's not proving his point.
So let's get into the details now. 8/21/2001 and 4/30/2002, neighbors testified that David Gray stalked his home in violation of his restraining order. And so I've read, these are all documents, primary source documents that I've read, and neighbors are saying that David Gray is looking into his house, he's showing up near the house. I'm going to admit that's kind of strange in my mind. I'm not sure exactly why he would do that. I haven't been in this situation. I know people who have been, where their life changes drastically one day. They're not allowed to be with their kids or their wife. They don't seem to be able to, in their minds, they feel helpless. They can't defend themselves. And yeah, sometimes they'll go driving past that house. I mean, they're homesick. So I don't know what was going through David Gray's head, but this probably doesn't help him all that much.
There's a very subtle shift here, and I hope you noticed it. This video is supposed to be about defending John MacArthur, about defending the elders and the staff at Grace Community Church. Up until this point, the point of the video wasn't to defend David Gray, the abuser, the child molester, David Gray. The point of the video was to defend the church's actions, to defend John MacArthur's actions. But he seemed to forget that narrative here, and he starts to find excuses for why David might be stalking his wife. He's not twisting it to say that the church didn't know about the stalking or something like that. He starts making excuses to why this child molester abuser was probably in a state of depression because his marriage was ending, so he made a bad choice. Why, though? Why did he all of a sudden start defending him? Because that's what happens when you are in defense mode. It's not objective. It's not about fairness. He was already going through all these details and finding ways to defend the elders who got arrested or the pastor who excommunicated her, that he forgot to shut off that defensive part when talking about the actual sex offender. He was just in the defending people mode, the defending horrible men mode.
Towards you or the children, has repented of his sin towards God and has taken practical steps toward change. Now here, this is really significant. I want you to remember this as we go through. The issue that isn't as much what did David do, as much as it is, has David repented?
What does that word even mean anymore? Because we already established that he broke his restraining order and he molested children.
If you look at it at face value, there's really not a lot that you can put on John MacArthur, let alone the elders that dealt with it. Not a lot you could put on them, other than that they made a mistake.
Everybody makes mistakes. That's why they put erasers on pencils.
20 years ago, in dealing with a married couple
pencils
made a mistake.
Everybody makes mistakes. That's why they put erasers on pencils.
20 years ago, in dealing with a married couple who the wife, and they were going through counseling through all this, and the wife made charges against her husband. The husband repented. The husband apologized. The husband seemed to be genuinely repentant. And the church encouraged her to take him back.
A soft voice doesn't make a disgusting point less disgusting.
And she didn't. So because of that, Pastor John, the elders that met with the couple, the counselors who met with the couple, all the members of the church, I don't know about all, but most of the members, if not all of the members of the church, they were encouraging her to do what they thought was right.
Christian abuse apologists love to use the word repentant. As if saying, "Oh, I'm really, really sorry," erases the harm that they caused. Do I believe that people can change? Yes, 100%. I believe that people can change. I believe that you can put the work in, and you can make yourself a very different person than you were before. But I also believe that the people you hurt along the way, when you were that person, don't owe you anything. You can work on making yourself a better person. You can work on making the world a better place. You are allowed to start making good choices, to start healing. But that doesn't mean that anyone you hurt in your past owes you anything. And they don't have to forgive you. And part of you becoming a better person is understanding that. And even though you may be a different person now, you still have to face the consequences of what you did in the past. Doug Wilson.
Amen.
Seen here giving us his resume.
White supremacist, theo-fascist, Christo-fascist, all-around bad guy.
Doug Wilson is one of the biggest voices in Christian nationalism today. Mr. War Criminal himself, Pete Hegseth, attends his church. Doug has been protecting a child sexual abuser for about 20 years now.
For example, this is a small town, right? Small town, and we have something, I forgot the exact number, but it's somewhere north of 30 convicted sex offenders living here in Moscow, right? And everybody knows the name of one of them because he's repentant and because of where he goes to church. Right. So if you molest little children, you don't have to worry about people with bumper stickers chasing you around trying to shoot you. Everybody leave you alone. Right. The thing that is causing the outrage against Stephen Sittler is not the offense, as egregious as that was. The fact is, the problem that is stumbling a lot of people is that he professes repentance, and because the church received him back under conditions and watching him and being careful, trust but verify, it was all that. But the fact that we have taken his confession and profession of faith, not at face value, but we've taken it seriously, and I preach to him on a weekly basis. He comes to the Lord's table on a weekly basis. That's the thing that sticks in everybody's craw.
It's not lost on me that it's easier to be a man who hurts children in these types of churches than it is to be a woman trying to protect yourself and to protect your children. In 2005, Sittler was a student at Doug Wilson's college, New St. Andrews, in Moscow, Idaho.
I'm sorry.
Instead of putting the students in dorms, they housed them with families in the community. The house Sittler was at had young children. Children he began to abuse immediately. See, he was comfortable doing this because he had been doing it to children at his home church in Colville, Washington for years.
Yeah, if I thought that the father was not going to call the cops because the guy was an old family friend, right? If for some reason I thought there was going to be a circling the wagons and protect this guy, then I would have had a responsibility to say. But it was very clear that that's what was going to happen. He was going to be turned in, which he was immediately. So he was turned in immediately, and then in the weeks that followed, when I started counseling him and I uncovered the other instances, he turned himself in because of that. All right. So the people who are angry, and this is the point I'm building up to, the people who are angry at me for quote unquote enabling files, right, are accusing me because of a case where I helped to bust a pedophile.
He also took a very long time to inform his congregation of what happened, even though Sittler had contact with other children in the congregation. Yes, he expelled him from the college, but he put criminal activity and no other details on his record. Sittler ended up being charged with one act of lewd behavior with a child, but confessed to multiple incidents. When it came time for sentencing, Wilson was the only one from Moscow to write a letter to the judge asking for leniency. A complete Mila and Ashton move. In the letter, he said, "I am grateful Stephen was caught, and I am grateful he has been brought to account for these actions so early in his life. I am grateful that he will be sentenced for his behavior, and there will be hard consequences for him in real life. At the same time, I would urge the civil penalties applied would be measured and limited. I have a good hope that Stephen has genuinely repented. Oh, we love that word, repented. And that he will continue to deal with this to become a productive and contributing member of society. A little more than a year later, Sittler was released from jail, and he was welcomed back at Christ Church.
Isn't this the gospel? That's exactly what it is. But like, isn't this really the gospel? We give this lip service as Christians. We deserve death. Mm-hmm. I'm a sinner, right? I'm covered in the blood of Christ, and man, but I'm not that bad. Right. We grade on a curve. So you could go to state penitentiary and have the frauds and the embezzlers and the burglars and the bank robbers and the murderers saying to one another, but at least I'm not that sex offender.
Yeah, and they're right. They should also do time, but they're right.
Right, because we're all grading on a curve. We would say, yeah, I'm guilty of many sins, but my sins are understandable human sins, and that's awful. Well, it really is awful, but so are yours.
Even Jesus said people who do harm to a child would be better if they had a millstone tied around their neck and be drowned in the sea. So, yeah, I think you're supposed to protect the children, not the predators that are hurting the children.
I'm a friend of as a preacher of the gospel that will bring them out of that grotesque sin, right? So I'm a friend of else because Christ was a friend to sinners. Right. But the thing, I'd return to the thing I said earlier, the thing that irritates everybody about Stephen's case is his professed repentance. Right.
After he was released from prison, a church elder set Sittler up with a graduate of New St. Andrews College, and after a brief courtship, Doug married the child molester and his bride. Now the question is, would they have children? And yes, of course. Sittler explained to the court that it was important for his religion that he has children, that God wanted them to have children, even though Sittler himself was not allowed to be near children unchaperoned. In 2015, they had their first son. 6 months later, he would be removed from the house for contact with his son that was described as heinous in nature. 6 months. See, even though he was not allowed to be around his child unchaperoned, his wife and his close friends from the church were allowed to be registered as chaperones. So he was allowed to be around his child. Sittler is still attending Christ Church today, as far as I know. But Sittler wasn't the only predator that Wilson has protected. In 2001, a 23-year-old college student named Jamin White began grooming a 13-year-old girl he met at Christ Church. He was attending Greyfriars Hall, part of New St. Andrews College, and like other students, he began boarding with a family. The family of the girl he was already grooming. And then he began to sexually abuse her in her own home. Wilson wrote a letter to the judge in this case as well. In it, he said, for example, I do not believe that this situation in any way points to Jamin as a sexual predator. In all my years as a pastor, I don't believe that I have ever seen such a level of parental foolishness as what the parents did in this case. But that doesn't excuse the predator from being a predator.
Well, how crazy that sounds to the average person who's been trained with the humanist line of, dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. But some of these guys need to open their mind just a little bit. Maybe somebody can drop an intelligent thought in there. I think from a Christian perspective, the world is very different than what our textbooks teach. I think dinosaurs always lived with people. They call them dragons. There could be some still alive.
That's Dr. Dino himself, Kent Hovind. And here he is on a recent interview on George Janko's YouTube channel.
Evolution is the dumbest and most dangerous religion in the world. Prove me wrong.
Let's dive even deeper on a spiritual level, right?
A channel with over 3 million subscribers.
What is their agenda on showing this philosophy versus God's philosophy?
The evolution theory teaches one race might be superior to another race. Darwin's book took over Japan like a storm, and the people started believing we're the superior race.
So it's turning everybody against each other.
One U.S. attorney down in Pensacola spent 5 years investigating, trying to find something to shut me up. When they came and arrested me, the judge said, Mr. Hoven, structuring carries a sentence of 0 to 6 months. I'm enhancing this to 10 years.
How long were you away for?
9 years.
You were in jail for 9 years?
There he is lying about the government locking him up because they didn't want his dragon theory to get out to more people. But in reality, it was for a bunch of tax fraud and tax evasion. I mean, I don't really care about that. At least I don't care enough to make a chunk of this video about his tax fraud. Although he does turn pretty red when he's lying about it.
The judge at sentencing said, Mr. Hoven, this crime you committed is worse than... Normally you get 6 months for structuring. I'm going to give you 10 years. We paid the $4,000 to get this transcript of the trial so we could do an appeal. You got to do the appeal within 12 months. They waited 14 months to give me the transcript and changed it. They took out the worst stuff.
I'm more concerned with the fact that he's a enabler and a wife abuser. In 2023, a man named Christopher Link Jones was arrested for a lewd act with a child that took place at Kent Hoven's Dinosaur Adventureland. It happened on the property in a room that the man was allowed to stay in, where other staff members didn't want to let them stay together. But Hoven insisted that they share a room. And the thing is, Hoven knew that this man had been arrested in the past for a lewd act with a child. But Hoven was convinced that it was because Jones worked with Alex Jones and that the government was trying to shut him up about exposing the New World Order. So Hoven let him bring kids to Dinosaur Adventureland and share a room with this man. After Jones was arrested, Hoven said that he still believed he was innocent and would still allow him back into the park again, despite the child stating that, yes, he was assaulted there. This recording of a conversation happened after the arrest.
Because I got up, I said, Chris,
what
you got these charges. What the heck are you in bed with a kid for? You're completely dressed.
But it was also the only bed in the house. It's not like
but anyway, I was just like, you couldn't convince me then that you should have done that.
You see, the way people say things, he was in bed with a child.
Yeah.
There's a way to make it sound worse than it is, you know.
I know, but
there's also a point.
But Chris has to remember.
Line of demarcation.
You don't get close to that fire.
But wait a minute, now, there's two things to consider. That's Chris's decision and the kid's decision. How people here react to that is their decision. Okay? He's got a right to wrestle with the kid if he wants, and you got a right to say, I'm not getting around Chris.
No, a convicted sex offender does not have the right to share a bed with a child. And just a quick shout out to Claude Balls on YouTube for helping me get some of these clips. Like the time Claude himself called Hoven out.
But that is very bad.
They can say that about Jesus too. Well, they
No,
say
I
that
don't
about
think. No. Jesus did not do anything to children. You know, come on.
Okay,
Jesus
Claude,
was good to
Claude,
children. Yeah.
Claude, listen to me. Neither did Brady. Neither did Chris. I know them well. 50 years ago, first of all, it's none of anybody else's business, but they love the Lord. Everybody's a sinner. They got something in their past. But I know them, and I know the story, and just to be safe, we're careful about that. But Jesus was accused of hanging around publicans and sinners. Everybody's ever come here is a sinner. Every visitor we've ever had. 70 countries, all 50 states. So, anyway. So, yeah, I can choose my friends if I want, and you can choose yours. Go ahead.
Yeah, of course. You know, I thought one time you mentioned the Brady did something with his own children 50 years ago. It's still not good, you know.
Well, I have no evidence either way whether he did or not.
You said he was guilty. You said he was guilty.
Oh, how could I know that? I didn't know him 50 years ago.
Well, you did say on Stephen, the channel of Stephen. It's there.
Yeah. Even if, again, have you ever done anything in your life, in the entire life?
Well, not with children. No, come on.
Not with children? So that's the divide. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Gambling with children is not good.
Some people like to look at one particular sin and to justify theirs. How about with other women? Have you ever slept with a woman you weren't married to?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, well, that's in the Big Ten Commandments. Don't commit adultery.
There we go again. Everyone is a sinner, so what's the big deal? And yes, you heard that right. He's defending another guy.
Claude, listen to me. Neither did Brady. Neither did Chris. I have one friend who lives 500 miles from here, who 35 or 40 years ago was guilty of a little bit of fondling somebody, one of his own children, and so they're holding that over now for the rest of his life.
Disgusting. And yes, Kent was arrested and spent 30 days in county jail for domestic violence of his third wife in 2021. And of course he claimed he's innocent. But George Janko had him on the show, and since then, a lot of people have been using those clips on social media, and Kent Hovind is becoming relevant to a whole new audience and a whole new generation. And there's another guest that Janko had on recently, a fellow by the name of Russell Brand.
Man, I'm excited about this interview.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it, George. I bet you are, Russell Brand.
You kind of remind me about this interview.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it, George. I bet you are, Russell Brand.
You kind of remind me, now this is kind of like a crazy way to start the podcast, but you read the Bible, you read the gospel now.
Yeah.
Paul went through it. He kind of picks people that have a background that is a little bit darker so he could shine brighter in that person, so that way people can know where the fruit is coming from.
It's a run by fruity. If you're not familiar with Russell Brand, he is a comedian who was in one good movie where most of the cast, including him, turned out to be awful human beings, except Jason Segel. If Jason Segel turns out to be a bad guy, I will walk into the ocean. My sweet, sweet Jason better be a good person. It's the only thing I have left. A little over 2 years ago, Russell Brand was accused of sexual assault, and since then, more women have come forward.
Now tonight, off stage, it sees him accused of sexual assault, controlling and abusive behaviour, uncovered in a major investigation by Channel 4 Dispatches, The Times, and The Sunday Times.
Hello there, you awakening wonders. Now, this isn't the usual type of video we make on this channel where we critique, attack, and undermine the news in all its corruption, because in this story, I am the news. I've received two extremely disturbing letters, or a letter and an email, one from a mainstream media TV company, one from a newspaper, listing a litany of extremely egregious and aggressive attacks, as well as some pretty stupid stuff like my community festival should be stopped, that I shouldn't be able to attack mainstream media narratives on this channel. But amidst this litany of astonishing, rather baroque attacks are some very serious allegations that I absolutely refute.
Like Kent Hovind, it's not that he did these things he's accused of, but he's saying important things, so people are making up lies to shut him up. And all of a sudden, he became a born-again Christian and started going on his I'm a Christian tour.
But I love this. You said, I wish I had known earlier about, I guess, the power of your faith, and that you feel his presence constantly.
Well, actually, someone that don't feel his presence, I wish I did feel it constantly. I can feel it now. I can feel it now. Sometimes I let go, and then I grab back hold of myself and what I want, and then I suffer.
Russell, man, it's so good to have you on the show. Ever since we saw you come to faith, Wes and I have been talking that we would love one day to have you on the show. So to have you on the show is a real privilege. I'm excited to talk to you today about your faith. Before we get into things, though, have you ever heard of apologetics before? Is that a new term to you? Are you familiar with it? And have you ever been on an apologetics podcast before? Or is this the first one?
I've never been on an apologetics podcast before. I don't like the name apologetics because of its obvious connection with apology. Not that I'm adverse to apology, as a person who believes deeply in restitution as a member of 12-step programs, but it's always struck me as a sort of an interesting position to start from. Look, sorry about the Crusades. Sorry about that. Sorry it doesn't fit in with your current cultural views. Sorry that it's not materialistic. Sorry that it's not individualistic. But I reckon probably at the root of this is my own personal misunderstanding of apologetics in that context.
Does he like to apologize? Does he like to make amends? Because he doesn't seem to be owning up to his crimes.
Well, actually, I didn't really make any decisions. I didn't make a decision to get baptized. I didn't make a decision to start talking about Christ. Actually, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I've been making. If I'd have thought about this more carefully, I probably would have done things differently. For a start, I would have put shoes on. But in the midst of the crisis that I described to you, the existential crisis, and I know Christians, it was a lot of Christians that appeared out of the midst. Now in my country, I don't know about here, they do their level best to make Christianity as absolutely tedious as possible. Like to make it like there's nothing to see here, there's nothing of interest, you don't need to pay any attention. But it's quite amazing that God came to earth in the form of a man and was sacrificed himself that we may be redeemed. But somehow in England they make it sound rather boring.
But why did he make this quick pivot to Christianity? Maybe he did have an experience that made him reflect and he accepted Jesus as his savior. Or maybe he realized that the one group that consistently protects predators is Christians. Maybe he realized that if he simply said he was a Christian now, people would believe him, that he did not do those horrible things, and people would welcome him. Maybe he realized that Christianity is a safe place for predators. And it looks like he was right.
We have Brand back in the London courtroom as new sexual assault charges move forward. This is video just into the newsroom. Brand arriving in court today for a plea hearing. Prosecutors say newly filed charges include...
And there he is, showing up for court the other day with his performance Bible. Look, everyone, it's full of bookmarks. I'm a real Christian. I read all the parts in the middle.
One count of sexual assault involving 2 additional women. Those allegations dating back to 2009. The 50-year-old already facing multiple counts of sexual and indecent assault from alleged incidents between 1999 and 2005. Now, Brand has pleaded not guilty. The court is now moving the case toward trial.
I've talked to so many women who were just told to forgive their assaulter. That their assaulter was going to keep coming to church because their assaulter repented and he was sorry. And if she can't stand to see him in church every Sunday, then that's her fault for not forgiving him, as Christ has forgiven her.
If there are those we have not forgiven when we ourselves pray for forgiveness, then, practically speaking, we are asking God not to restore a right relationship with us after we sin. To emphasize the importance of restoring broken relationships with our brothers and sisters, Jesus states that asking for God's forgiveness for one's own sins, all the while withholding forgiveness from someone else, is not only bizarre, but hypocritical. We cannot possibly walk with God in true fellowship if we refuse to forgive others.
How do you forgive something that feels unforgivable? I mean, unfaithfulness in marriage, how do you heal after that? How do you heal after betrayal, after abuse, after neglect? How do you heal after some of the stuff that you've been through? How do you forgive? The answer is straight in God's Word. Colossians 3:13 tells us this. We are to forgive, say it with me, as the Lord forgave you. Wow. How am I to forgive somebody who hurt me? In the exact same way that God has forgiven me. I don't know about you, but I've been forgiven a lot. And in the same way that I've been forgiven, that's how I'm supposed to forgive others.
Bless your enemies. And the blessing is the test of the forgiving. You say, well, I've forgiven them. Well, have you blessed them? Well, of course not. Okay, well, then you may not have forgiven them. Because once you forgive someone, the test or proof of forgiving them is blessing.
If people have hurt you, the number one thing that God requires is that you forgive them. And the really painful part, bless them.
This is Dan O'Reilly. He's an Israeli-American author and professor at Duke University.
Hello, and today I want to talk about forgiveness to mistakes. In particular, I want to ask whether we will forgive more mistakes from humans or from non-humans, algorithms, robots.
And this is an email he wrote to Jeffrey Epstein about Jeffrey Epstein's little boo-boo of being a child sex offender. Dear Jeffrey, some time ago after we met for the first time, I started wondering what makes people forgive others. So I asked about 500 people how likely they are to forgive, befriend, hire people who were accused of different crimes after they had served their sentences according to the law. This is far from an ideal study, but what you see in the attached file is that crimes related to sex do worse than anything else, even murder, and that violations or government rules are the easiest for people to forgive. I realize that this is not good news for you. Aw, boo-hoo. And I have no intentions to offend. But I am sending you this in case you are interested, and if you want to talk about where to take this research or other questions, let me know. Here's another email that I've seen received. F and I are likely to be in New York Easter early evening. Are you up for tea or dinner? Or post-dinner hangout? I've been thinking a lot about you and the whole situation, and I have an idea, especially after looking at Dan O'Reilly's data briefly here, that you would fund a forgiveness project of some sort. There are a few in existence now, and Templeton has funded programs in this area. There are processes, ACT, the work of Byron Katie, radical forgiveness. There's physiology, neuroscience of forgiveness also. There's a way in which these things might be brought together under an umbrella of some sort, or they might be compared to find the strongest process. Then workshops and the most effective processes offered on scholarships both to people in prisons and to people who perceive themselves as victims. Just a thought. Hope to see you in New York. Thanks for the time at Redacted. XOXO. Redacted for some reason. And of course, somebody who committed terrible crimes would like the idea of a forgiveness project. Why do the work to improve yourself and take accountability when you can fund a project that makes people want to forgive you? Remember, this is also the guy who spent a lot of time online trying to convince people not to believe women, so I guess he came at his little situation from different angles. And here he is telling someone who obviously shouldn't be redacted how to respond to somebody who rightly didn't want to associate with him. I think you should send the following. Jesse, I'm somewhat surprised, as I thought you and Jeffrey were one-time buds. Jeffrey is not one of the top 5 wealthiest people in New York, but I would suggest that there's a broad consensus that he is one of the smartest. What an asshole. He pled guilty to a crime many years ago and paid a large price for his mistakes. Let's not forget that for decades he used both his extraordinary intellect and his wealth, remember he's writing this about himself, to support many charitable causes, benefiting those much less fortunate than he. The Quaker-inspired method of shunning and shaming was replaced hundreds of years ago by the more benevolent practice of forgiveness. His friends were asked for theirs, and he received it. Barf emoji, barf emoji, barf emoji. Forgiveness can be a beautiful part of healing, but as I've said so many times, it is useless when it is required. No one is owed forgiveness. When forgiveness is demanded or required, it is only a tool of the oppressor. It is the predator's favorite virtue. This is toxic forgiveness.
Justice doesn't work like that. You don't get to decide when and how your debt is paid.
The perpetrator can say they've repented and are sorry for their actions, and they are welcomed back into the church. But the perpetrator isn't the one who has a panic attack when they see the other person. The perpetrator isn't the one who is afraid for their safety if they are in the same room as the other person. It's easy to pretend to repent. Trauma isn't that easy. So the victim gets pushed out. The victim gets punished. The victim is then blamed for not forgiving. The victim is pushed out of the church, and the predator stays ready to hurt the next person. Real repentance would be leaving the situation, making sure that the person feels safe.
There are enormous, like there's this whole phenomenon right now growing, like a little Christian TMZ website, all they...
It is only a tool of forgiveness. When forgiveness is demanded or required, it is only a tool of the oppressor. It is the predator's favorite virtue. This is toxic forgiveness.
Justice doesn't work like that. You don't get to decide when and how your debt is paid.
The perpetrator can say they've
work like that. You don't get to decide.
This is useless. Received it. Barf emoji, barf emoji, barf emoji. Forgiveness can be a beautiful part of healing, but as I've said so many times, it is useless when it is of forgiveness. His friends were asked for theirs, and he received it. Barf emoji, barf emoji, barf emoji. Forgiveness can be a beautiful part of healing. Emoji, barf emoji, barf emoji. Forgiveness can be a beautiful part of healing, but as I've said so many times, it is useless when it is required. No one is owed forgiveness. When forgiveness is demanded or required, it is only a tool of the oppressor. It is the predator's favorite virtue. This is toxic forgiveness.
Justice doesn't work like that. You don't get to decide when and how your debt is paid.
The perpetrator can say they've repented and are sorry for their actions, and they are welcomed back into the church. But the perpetrator isn't the one who has a panic attack when they see the other person. The perpetrator isn't the one who is afraid for their safety if they are in the same room as the other person. It's easy to pretend to repent. Trauma isn't that easy. So the victim gets pushed out. The victim gets punished. The victim is then blamed for not forgiving. The victim is pushed out of the church, and the predator stays ready to hurt the next person. Real repentance would be leaving the situation, making sure that the person feels safe.
There are enormous, like there's this whole phenomenon right now growing, like a little Christian TMZ website. All they do is just accuse, tear down, only negative. The only thing they ever talk about is the negatives of church. Listen to me, in the Bible you got two things. Jesus says, I will build my church, and the Bible describes Satan as the accuser of the church. Watch out if you wake up someday and you're on team Satan. You don't want to do that, so like be very careful, man. Be very careful about the attitudes and thoughts and postures you have towards the church, or people insult the church. You've heard people say stuff like this: I love Jesus, I just don't like the church. Well, here's a big problem for you, Scooter. In this passage, what it says is Jesus is among the church.
Well, then Jesus better start doing something. Or what's the point of him being there in the first place? Change doesn't happen by people being silent. Change happens when people speak out. He talks about how you shouldn't criticize the church while being a Protestant. But according to his logic, Martin Luther was on Team Satan. But Trevor, the Catholic Church wasn't the true church. They lost their way. They needed to be called out. Those websites he's talking about, they're calling out sexual abuse and other abuses within the church. Do you think that's the true church? If you do, I think we know what the problem is. So should we be surprised that Christians are still supporting Trump? No, he's on their team. In so many ways. There are so many deal breakers for so many Christians, but sexual abuse doesn't seem to be one of them. Hey everybody, thank you so much for making it this far. I appreciate you all, love you all, and all the stuff. Thank you.
Work, Sky Moon.
Oh, goddamn Holy Ghost fuck is Bobby.
There's a category of question that doesn't get answered in church, in mosque, in temple, or at the dinner table. Not because no one's thought of them, but because the moment someone asks, the room shifts, eyes drop, the subject changes, someone quotes scripture, someone else says, you just need more faith. These aren't trick questions. They're not attacks. They're the kind of honest, logical questions a curious 10-year-old might ask and never get a straight answer to. Tonight, we're asking 10 of them, calmly, carefully, without apology. Question 1. If God is perfect, why does his creation require constant fixing? Perfection, by definition, doesn't need revision. A perfect architect doesn't demolish the building. A perfect author doesn't retract the book. A perfect engineer doesn't flood the prototype and start over. We understand this instinctively because we apply it everywhere else in life. When something needs fixing, we assume either the original design was flawed or the builder lacked the skill to get it right the first time. We never look at a bridge that keeps collapsing and say the engineer was perfect. Yet across virtually every major religion, the divine narrative is one long series of interventions, corrections, and do-overs, floods to reset humanity, prophets sent to course correct, new covenants to replace broken ones, updated scripture to clarify older scripture, chosen people who repeatedly fail their mission, saviors arriving to repair what creation itself could not sustain. The story doesn't read like a masterwork unfolding according to plan. It reads like a series of increasingly desperate attempts to salvage something that keeps going wrong. And here's the part that deserves to sit uncomfortably for a moment. These are not minor adjustments. We are talking about wiping out virtually all life on Earth and starting over. We are talking about centuries of what the texts themselves describe as failure, disobedience, corruption, and abandonment. If an all-knowing God designed this system, He designed it knowing exactly how it would unfold. Every act of human sin, every generation that strayed, every civilization that had to be destroyed was not a surprise. It was baked into the original blueprint. So what does that actually mean? It means either God did not foresee the outcome, which contradicts omniscience, or God foresaw it and chose it anyway, which raises questions about what love and justice actually mean in that framework. Or the narrative was never about a perfect creator at all, but about something far more human, a story written by people trying to make sense of a chaotic and often brutal world. The believer's answer is usually some version of, that's the mystery of God's plan. But mystery isn't an answer. Mystery is what you say when an answer isn't available. A perfect being would not have needed to create something that required saving. The need for salvation implies a flaw, either in the design or in the designer. And once you see that clearly, the architecture of the entire belief system begins to look very different. Question 2. Why does God's morality keep improving alongside human morality? Go back far enough in the history of any major religion, and you find a God who approved of things we now universally condemn. Genocide of enemy tribes, slavery as an institution, regulated but not abolished, the subordination of women as a divine command, not a cultural footnote, punishment of children for the sins of parents, death penalties for curiosity, dissent, and the wrong kind of fire on the altar. These weren't cultural misunderstandings. They were commands, endorsed, sometimes celebrated. The texts don't hide this. They present these things plainly, often with detailed instructions on how to carry them out properly, how many slaves you may take and from where, how to conduct a holy war, how to execute your own child for being rebellious. This is not fringe interpretation. This is the text. Now, fast forward to today. Those same religions have largely softened, reinterpreted, or quietly abandoned those positions. Not because God issued a new statement, not because a prophet arrived with updated instructions, but because human culture moved forward and scripture had to be reread to keep up. Verses that were once cited to defend slavery are now called metaphor. Commands that justified violence against outsiders are now contextualized as products of their era. The eternal Word of God turns out to be surprisingly flexible when public opinion shifts far enough.
Amen.
And that flexibility is the tell. Because notice the direction it always moves. Religious morality does not lead social progress, it follows it. Abolitionists had to fight churches, not just slaveholders. Women's rights movements had to push against religious institutions, not partner with them. Gay rights, interracial marriage, religious tolerance itself. In nearly every case, the moral expansion happened despite organized religion, and theology caught up afterward, quietly rewriting what eternal had always meant. Here is what that pattern actually reveals. Moral progress doesn't flow downward from divine revelation, it flows upward from human experience. People suffer, people extend empathy, people demand change.
Now fuck
And
up
then,
and take that.
slowly, theology finds a way to have agreed with them all along. Empathy expands, conscience evolves, and then theology follows. If morality were truly handed down from an eternal, perfect source, it would not need to be continuously upgraded by the people below it. An infinite God would have seen slavery as wrong before humans did. He would have recognized the full humanity of women before culture did. He would not have needed abolitionists, suffragettes, or civil rights marchers to clarify what he meant. The fact that divine morality keeps arriving just slightly behind human conscience, always catching up but never leading, tells you something important. It tells you the conscience doing the actual moral work was never coming from above, it was coming from us. And once you see that, the authority of revealed morality starts to look less like wisdom from outside the human story, and more like a reflection of wherever humanity already was. Question 3. Why does an all-knowing God create people he already knows will be condemned? This one is quiet but devastating. If God possesses complete foreknowledge, if he knows before a soul is born how every moment of their life will unfold, what choices they'll make, what they'll believe, what they'll doubt, then creation is not an act of love, it's a sentencing. The life hasn't started yet, but the verdict is already written. Before that person draws their first breath, their eternal outcome is already known, and yet they are created anyway, not despite that knowledge, with it. Fully, perfectly, completely aware of what awaits them, God reaches down and lights the fuse regardless. Sit with that image for a moment without rushing past it. Some will be born into circumstances that make belief nearly impossible, into war zones where survival consumes every waking thought and theology feels like a luxury for people with full stomachs and safe rooftops. Into poverty so grinding that the idea of a loving, attentive God strains beyond what lived experience can support. Into families and communities built around a completely different faith tradition, one that names a different God, tells a different story, and is no less sincere in its devotion. Some will be born with minds that are simply wired to demand evidence before extending trust, not as a moral failing but as a cognitive reality, the same quality that makes a good scientist or a careful doctor. Some will encounter religion for the first time through the people who weaponize it, through abuse, manipulation, and cruelty carried out in God's name, and they will walk away not out of arrogance, but out of reasonable self-protection. All of this is known in advance. Every single one of these lives, these circumstances, these outcomes, fully visible to an omniscient God before the moment of creation. So the question becomes, what is the moral justification for creating a being you already know will suffer forever? This is not a question about human free will. Free will does not resolve it. If I build a machine, program it, set its environment, and then watch it do exactly what I designed it to do in exactly the conditions I placed it in, I don't get to call the outcome its choice. Foreknowledge of that depth collapses the distinction between creator and author. God isn't watching the story unfold. He wrote it. Every condemned soul is a character he chose to put on the page, knowing exactly how their final chapter reads. Some theologians respond by saying God allows suffering out of respect for human freedom, but freedom and foreknowledge cannot coexist in the way the argument requires. You cannot simultaneously know with certainty what someone will freely choose and also claim their choice is genuinely open. Certainty and freedom pull in opposite directions. One of them has to give. If I knew with certainty that planting a seed would result in decades of suffering and then permanent torment, and I planted it anyway, we wouldn't call that love. We wouldn't call it mysterious. We wouldn't call it part of a plan too complex for us to understand. We would call it a choice. A deliberate, informed, inexcusable choice. And we would hold the person who made it responsible for every moment of suffering that followed. The only difference here is the scale. And scale, in this case, doesn't reduce the moral weight, it multiplies it. Question 4. Why do prayers have the same success rate as chants? This deserves a genuinely honest look, not a dismissive one. When prayers appear to be answered, it confirms faith. When they aren't, it's explained as God's will, wrong timing, insufficient faith, or a lesson being learned. When someone survives a disaster, God is praised. When someone doesn't, God's plan is invoked. When a child recovers from illness, it's a miracle. When a child in the same hospital ward does not recover, it becomes a mystery too deep for human understanding. Notice what this structure does. It makes the belief unfalsifiable. Every outcome, positive or negative, expected or shocking, confirms the original claim. There is no result that could possibly count as evidence against the power of prayer, because the interpretive framework absorbs everything. Good outcomes prove God answers. Bad outcomes prove God knows better. The framework cannot lose because it has quietly defined winning and losing as the same thing. But unfalsifiability isn't a feature of truth. It's a feature of a closed system. And closed systems are not built to find truth. They are built to protect a conclusion that was decided in advance. Now look at what the actual evidence shows. And this matters because the question deserves more than philosophy. It deserves data. Large-scale studies on intercessory prayer, conducted by researchers who genuinely wanted to find an effect.
This is like one of my favorite diagrams. That is
the most rigorous
of every
a
cross-reference.
study involving nearly 1,800 cardiac surgery patients found that people who were prayed for recovered at statistically the same rate as those who were not. In fact, patients who knew they were being prayed for showed slightly worse outcomes, possibly because the knowledge introduced additional anxiety about the seriousness of their condition. The prayer group did not outperform chance. It performed at chance, or marginal below it. These were not studies designed by skeptics hoping to embarrass religion. They were funded in part by organizations sympathetic to faith. The researchers wanted to find something. They found nothing. And that finding matters because prayer is not presented by most traditions as a vague spiritual practice with uncertain outcomes. It is presented as communication with an attentive, responsive, all-powerful being who hears every word and acts on behalf of those who ask sincerely. That is a testable claim, not a philosophical one, not a metaphorical one, a claim about cause and effect in the real world. When we test it, cause and effect disappear. What remains is a pattern indistinguishable from the normal distribution of outcomes that would occur without any prayer at all. Some people recover, some don't. The variables that actually predict recovery, quality of medical care, age, overall health, timing of treatment, match the outcomes far more reliably than the presence or absence of prayer. If prayer produces results indistinguishable from chance, what exactly is the mechanism? If the mechanism cannot be tested, cannot be measured, and cannot be falsified, how is it meaningfully different from wishing? The honest answer, the one that rarely gets spoken aloud in places of worship, is that it may not be different at all. And the comfort prayer provides, which is real, which genuinely helps people cope, may have nothing to do with the divine receiver on the other end. It may simply be the calming effect of focused thought, of feeling less alone, of ritual and repetition in the face of uncertainty. That comfort is human. It is valuable. The calm communication with God requires evidence that, after centuries of prayer and decades of study, has never arrived. Question 5. Why is the experience of God so suspiciously tied to brain chemistry? This is where neuroscience enters the conversation, and it's uncomfortable. The feeling of divine presence, the overwhelming certainty of connection to something infinite, the sense of being called or spoken to. These experiences are real. No one is questioning that people have them. They are often the most vivid, most meaningful, most life-altering moments a person ever encounters. People reorganize their entire existence around them. They leave careers, end relationships, cross continents, dedicate decades. The experience feels more real than ordinary reality, more certain than anything the waking mind normally produces. That intensity is not in dispute. But these experiences are also reproducible through means that have nothing to do with the divine. And that reproducibility is where the conversation gets genuinely difficult. Temporal lobe stimulation, applying a mild...
Needed him to be a joke. Long. But like someone like me who comes along and reads both side by side, what would I think? How would my judgment be? Especially when tens of thousands of people thought he was worthy of following. That's kind of what I do. I try to step outside the box. Don't try to take a position, start with that position, and then try to draw a conclusion. I look at it and go, well, let's lay out both of them. And let's see, compare, things like that.
But that was just a historical comment that I think is worth making a mention of.
Yeah, for sure. For example, it's easy to point out there were Bible claimants to Messiah after Christ in the first century. You could have the Maccabee guy too, the Bar Kokhba guy. People swore that he was a religious return figure as well. So, I think I read once there might have even been like dozens of messianic movements in first century Palestine.
There were. Yeah. There's in the commentary of Clement on the Gospel of John, he talks about a guy named Dositheus. And so if you go check that out, it's really interesting. But the Dositheans, which were his followers, in the 3rd century, were saying he's still alive and that he never died, he never tasted death. Now, Dositheus lived around the time of Jesus in the 1st century. That's 200 plus years. They're still saying he didn't die. So, you know what I mean? In my mind, I'm like, well, what did they believe? And how does that match? We don't have the writings. None of it's preserved. We only know through the Christian polemicist, philosopher, apologist, if I can call him that, Clement, who, I have my quibs with, but also might contribute some interesting things. He leaves a note in there as a jab toward the Dositheans because in the Gospel of John, some of the doctrines of the Dositheans are compared to Jesus. And so there's still people around in his day that are commenting on that. Real quick, while we got super chats here, I didn't realize Worship in the House left a super chat, I think. Was it a super chat? He said no. He didn't clarify what. Okay, that was at me. Okay. Because, I'm kind of open-ended. Right? So. Got it. Okay. So Worship wanted to ask that, but I want to get these super chats real quick. Late Night Kaju, thank you for the gifted Myth Vision podcast membership. Really appreciate the support. And Chuckles576, how does a num feel about... Is it a num?
Yeah.
How do you feel about apostasy laws?
Yeah, no, obviously I'm against them because I think in at least 22 countries I might just face a chopping block. But yeah. It's not a good thing.
Okay. You're not for
well, that's you guys sniffed out I'm heretical on 1 or 2 points. There's a few other things I'm a notorious heretic about, but I didn't want to make a show about me. So, but yeah.
Well, it is. You're the guest. You're hopping on.
Well, then I'll say that because I usually go on Christian apologist channels. But I had a religious experience when I was 22. And I believe that Christ revealed himself to me, but I am a Trinitarian Muslim, so I stay within Islam, but I just kind of view it from a more unorthodox paradigm. And but again, I didn't want to start the conversation that way.
I wish you did. I'm just kidding. No, it's fine. I'm kidding. Go ahead, Aladdin.
I'm always curious. So when I have a conversation with someone like on my channel, on live streams like these, there are often people in the comments, especially people who are not familiar with me, who would start asking questions and be like, okay, let's corner him on this or on that. Or like he's lying about this, he's a Christian pretending to be a Muslim, or he was a Muslim pretending to be a Christian. I like to believe that the person talking to me is being honest, at least for their own sake. Obviously, if they start saying things that contradict, what they're saying earlier, then I'll be suspicious. But I'd like to believe that you're telling me the truth, and I'm more curious about how you get to your beliefs than putting you in a box specifically. So yeah, you're aware. You're very, I guess, heretical by the traditional definition of a Muslim. So let's cater the question to you. How do you know that it was Jesus that spoke to you, or that there is basis or validity to the holy texts that are either the Bible or the Quran?
Let me concede your point. Okay, I'll the point of your question. I'll give you this. Right, since I was 14, I had studied so much on why the Trinity was incoherent, and I learned about the New Testament and read so much of the New Testament. And I was so annoying about critiquing the New Testament that none of my classmates liked me. I wasn't a very popular kid. I didn't get invited to too many birthday parties. But the thing is though, I think that radical change happens at some point, possibly because you hate something, right? Because you have so much energy and fuel bottled up against, you're weaponized basically against a certain doctrine. That psychologically can be a catalyst for, like Paul, for example, in the New Testament as well. He's fiercely anti-Christian. And then when you look at it as, wow, he does a sudden, 180, it's actually that kind of person who if you hate something that much, if you're obsessed with something that much, you actually love it, in a way, right? So that's my own realization I have.
So quick follow-up. So you clearly identify that your focus on critiquing Christianity at the time, given your Islamic context and upbringing, is what got you close to interpreting something that happened as Jesus speaking to you. Right. So do you recognize that it was circumstantial in a sense, not an actual communication from Jesus?
Yes, but no. Can I tell you? Because you guys are very good skeptics and stuff. Did you see the movie Slumdog Millionaire? Okay. So the thing is, though, the way that movie is framed, right? Forget about Dave Patel and all that. Is that his entire life leads up to each of those questions, right? The $25,000 question is about when his mother was killed in a riot in India. The $50,000 question is about when he got rejected for a job interview. The $75,000 question is, when his dad left him alone at the train station. Whatever his life experience was. So something that impossible, right? Like the planets aligning in a way, right? Like something like that. That, for example, so it's hard to put into words. But yes, so I understand you're saying that me being in a unique circumstance would be the one to realize that, the Trinity is true because Christ, revealed himself to me somehow.
But I don't want you to interpret any of my questions as like a trap or leading or something. It's just because you mentioned that you recognize that you hate something for so long, or you obsess over it, you actually kind of love it. You recognize that relationship you had with Christianity has led you to then have Christianity on your mind and then eventually view it favorably. So how do you discern that, how do you separate seeing the events that led to it from the belief that, no, actually God did speak to me, and it's not just that he set up my life in that way in order to speak to me, but it actually happened? Like, how do you know the reality of it?
That's why I do, I do try to watch your show, Aladdin, because I do feel like, I have to challenge myself every day. Thinking skeptically is so important. And like the idea that, that experience is all in my head, and I need to move on from it. I do think that maybe, but one of the things that keeps me in though, right, is that, and again, if you watch the debate with Sam Harris and Rabbi Wolpe, there's a guy who's on the National Institute of Health. He talks about how he converted to Christianity, and it's a simple story, like he saw a waterfall, and it was frozen in three, and that's what led him to become a Christian. And it doesn't make sense to someone who's not having the religious experience. But I think Derek, for example, when he mentioned like he's crying during the Odyssey, I think sometimes when something, like it's a subjective thing, and then that's when, but here's the thing, right? Here's the wild thing though. Between subjectivity and objectivity, there's not like a hard and fast line, right? At some point, like the subjective put together is how we figure it out. That's what empiricism is, right? Anyway, so I don't want to wax on too long.
Well, I get it from Lord of the Rings, too, you know what I mean? Like, anyway, go ahead. I want to push back on one thing you said that you're thinking, what if it's, maybe I should just move on from it and think that it's all in my head and I need to move on. That's not the only other alternative, right? I'm not saying it's either Jesus spoke to you or you need to move on in a dismissive way. There are other options, like you already are kind of halfway there, if not more. Understanding the factors that led to you having that experience and your frame of mind, that in and of itself is a way of moving forward.
putting some significance to it that is metaphysical, that's another way, or maybe the significance of, what that belief did to you in that stage of your life, that's another way. It's not either call it Jesus or ignore it, you're crazy. That's not what I'm suggesting here. So I'm just very curious always to ask these questions to people who have beliefs, especially the ones that are not very traditional, because the goal is to help you think about how you know things, not to disprove you wrong. So I'm curious if in the future you'll think more about, how do I know that this happened, not just subjectively, but it actually happened, or is it just that it's affecting my life a certain way and it helps me to believe that it happened?
Yeah, for sure. I will take your advice, and I really appreciate the tone of your discussion and your questioning, and you're really cool guy, actually.
Thank you so much. I think the same of you, and I think there's a lot we have in common, and that's where I like to start.
Nice to meet you, Daryl.
Yeah. Nice to meet you, and thanks for calling in. I mean, look, I didn't know what to expect. I was bracing for impact today with Aladdin, and I was like, wow, some of the nicest people popping in here today. So this is really cool. Good to meet you, Anam, and tell Rob I said hey.
Yes. Have a great afternoon.
You too.
Bye-bye.
All right. We are getting close, man. I got 20 minutes, and the food has been cooking. I'm not gonna lie. I can smell this food. So
I'll leave it up to you. I'm fine to do one quick last caller. If you want to wrap up, I'm also fine with that.
Look, I hate to leave people hanging, but I want to do this more. So I don't want to leave people hanging as if we're not going to do this again. I really, really do want to do this again. I feel like we should unpack some of what maybe our discussions have been today. Not to, you're not here, you can't defend yourself kind of thing, but like to unpack what we've covered a little and then wrap things up and do this again. I didn't know what to expect with this kind of call. And we were kind of, wondering ourselves, right? Like, how's this going to go? What's up? I want to allow you as guests joining me, and of course, I hope we do this again in the future. You're a fantastic person to do this with, especially in the ex-Muslim arena, and you're not just creating a war with the callers. I mean, sure, there's going to be tension. It's going to happen. These are identities that people hold, What did you think? What do you think about some of the callers that called in? Some assessments. I'll give my thoughts, and if anyone has any super chats or questions, feel free to send them in, and we will address it.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, I've been doing this for a while. I take breaks sometimes, but taking calls and doing these live streams, I've done that for several years now. And in the beginning, there was almost a bit of disappointment when I would talk to people, like say some of the callers today who would be deemed heretics as Muslims. And I would think to myself, like, why are you wasting my time? Or like, is this a waste of time for the viewers? I just want to talk to the guy who was like the sheikh I was arguing with, Like, that's the point of view that I want to highlight. But in realizing that, so many of those people have beliefs that don't fit in those boxes, I found the process itself to be illuminating. Showing people that when there was someone in the chat, for example, saying, and I don't want to get into the details of it in this live stream, but, all, like, in Iran, there's this, there's that, and like the Muslims are planning a takeover of the West and all that kind of stuff. And then you have all these callers, right? Who each, a lot of them are calling us from places in the West. And each of them give us a very different perspective on what they think God is, how they interact with religion. That doesn't negate that there are harmful things in the books, but it shows you a realistic image of how people deal with spirituality, not just Muslims, but in every religion. So I like that.
Stupid!
People are frustrated.
That's one of those pieces of
let's corner him, let's get him to admit he was wrong. The best thing to do in this conversation is to reiterate what they're saying, make sure you're getting their perspective. And
as a matter of fact, you can kiss that whore goodbye.
I can't hold the beliefs that they hold. I can
kiss that whore goodbye.
I think we succeeded at doing that today.
I think this was pretty good. I mean, I'm glad it was a successful one because of the current climate in the world right now. I mean, people want to see more fire. They want to see more gasoline added to the fire. There are some, of course, that do. And then there are others who are more like, man, we need some peace in our lives. And sometimes there's going to be fire. I feel like quoting Ecclesiastes. Sometimes there's time to cry, sometimes there's time to laugh, sometimes. Well, there's a time for peace, and I think this was a very powerful, important episode for those who are in the West who do not know or have no Muslim friends or something like that. It's like, look, I'm telling you, be open-minded, because not everyone thinks the same way. Not everyone is the same way. Even if they have the same beliefs, someone might come in and they might be Sunni or Shia or whatever, and they don't. They're not. It's individuals, right, that make up a lot of things. And so someone might go, "Oh, all Christians do this." It's like, no. If you talk to many, I have many Christian friends, and yet I'm still critical of Christianity on a regular. So you can do both. I think that there's a chance we could have a pretty successful continuation of doing this with more callers, and I think it's enlightening for many reasons. I mean, sure, we need to have debate, but also there's a time where it's like we can cross that aisle and have the conversation. And by the way, you're really good at not trying to make it so antagonistic. You know what I mean? Like, we could get antagonistic, but you're very understanding of the people, or trying to be understanding of the people. You know what I mean?
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You know me. If you wanted someone to come here and make things loud, that's not the right person. But I think this is more productive, though it causes less clicks. So everyone hit the like button. If you want this kind of discourse to be more popular, make it more popular. Leave a comment, share, subscribe, do all that stuff. Because without you, we can't do this. So that was a shout out to the audience.
Sure, there are going to be some wars, okay? Don't get me wrong in terms of ideology. There are going to be those. That's going to happen. I'm going to have guests on who are a little more antsy, a little more, what's up? But those are fun. As long as we understand at the end of the day, like, listen, let's not make that hate, okay? Let's just say, I don't agree, let's disagree, let's see the flaws of people's arguments or whatever, and we're not trying to, like, create some type of hatred toward a people for that. Because at the end of the day, as I said before the stream, Aladdin, a lot of these people were born and raised, or as you just had this guest, they have a religious experience, whatever. You might say that, well, that was a delusion, or because humans have those, or whatever it might be you want to say, okay? Their identity is wrapped up in these things, and I just want to be cautious, is all I'm saying, on how we do a lot of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I hope I'm making sense. Yeah, I hope I'm making sense. Anyway, anything from you, man? Any final words from you?
No, just to keep watching, keep engaging with with an open mind and honest intentions, and try to think the best of other people till they prove otherwise. And thank you for having me, Derek. Make sure again to like. That's what I always tell people. If you want to see more of this, make it happen. So hit the like button.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother. I'm going to go eat. And I think we need to do this again, and hopefully within the next, I don't know, we'll figure it out. We'll talk.
Yeah.
Talk to you
Thanks,
later.
man. Everyone, have a wonderful day.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill, and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill, and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Whew, I'm so glad I was able to dick up that fucking poem. God damn it. Come on, you goddamn son of a bitch. Move, you motherfucker. I'm fucking you up. Yep. Because somebody was called the law or the FTP, because somebody would have called the law or the FBI and they would have stopped me from doing this without letting my voice be heard. Without letting my voice be heard.
Man, I'm fucking you up. I'm fucking you up. He's fucking you up. Stupid! Now let's get into the white man's chicken. I fucked his. Oh, it's time to make me some new coffee. I didn't do this before I get too tired, huh? Yeah. I do. 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 Now fuck up and overload this so I can eat. God damn it. That fucking been taken with that rook. If I can dick up that goddamn rook. I do. Stupid! I was so hoping you'd fuck up and god damn it. Jesus fucking goddamn Christ.
Mild electrical current to a specific region of the brain can produce an immediate and overwhelming feeling that someone else is in the room, not a vague impression. A felt presence, described by subjects as deeply real and sometimes unmistakably spiritual. No God required. Just an electrode and a precise location on the skull. Psychedelic compounds, particularly psilocybin and genuinely difficult. Temporal lobe stimulation, applying a mild electrical current to a specific region of the brain, can produce an immediate and overwhelming feeling that someone else is in the room, not a vague impression. A felt presence, described by subjects as deeply real and sometimes unmistakably spiritual. No God required. Just an electrode and a precise location on the skull. Psychedelic compounds, particularly psilocybin and DMT, generate experiences of ego dissolution, of the boundaries of the self dissolving into something vast and interconnected, of encountering a loving intelligence that feels more fundamental than anything in ordinary life. In clinical studies at Johns Hopkins and NYU, participants consistently rated these experiences among the most meaningful of their entire lives, comparable to the birth of a child or the death of a parent. A significant portion describe them in explicitly spiritual or religious terms, many without any prior religious background. The compound does not the most meaningful of their entire lives, comparable to the birth. In clinical studies at Johns Hopkins and NYU, participants consistently rated these experiences among the most meaningful of their entire lives, comparable to the birth of a child or the death of a parent. A significant portion describe them in explicitly spiritual or religious terms, many without any prior religious background. The compound does not know what God you were raised to believe in. It produces the experience regardless. Extreme fasting produces visions. Sleep deprivation produces voices. Prolonged isolation produces a felt sense of presence and communication. Intense rhythmic breathing, sensory deprivation, prolonged meditation, high fever, oxygen deprivation during near-death events. All of these rely without any prior religious background. The compound does not know what God you were raised to believe in. It produces the experience regardless. Extreme fasting produces visions. Sleep deprivation produces voices. Prolonged isolation produces a felt sense of presence and communication. Intense rhythmic breathing, sensory deprivation, prolonged meditation, high fever, oxygen deprivation during near-death events. All of these reliably generate states that believers across completely different traditions describe in nearly identical terms. The light, the presence, the certainty, the love, the dissolution of self into something greater. The brain, under the right conditions, generates transcendence. This is not a fringe claim. It is one of the most replicated findings in the neuroscience of religion. Now here is where intellectual honesty requires us to slow down and sit with an uncomfortable question rather than rushing past it. The believer's instinct is to say that God works through the brain, that of course a divine experience would have a neural signature, because everything experienced by a human being has a neural signature. That is a reasonable response, and it cannot be fully dismissed. We cannot rule out that the brain is simply the instrument through which something external makes contact. But consider what that argument requires. It requires that God, an infinite and all-powerful being, chooses to communicate in a way that is completely indistinguishable from what happens when someone takes a pill, goes without sleep for 4 days, or has a specific region of their brain stimulated with a magnet. It requires that the most important message in human existence arrives through a channel that can be replicated, interrupted, amplified, or eliminated entirely by adjusting chemistry and electrical activity. If your experience of the divine is neurologically identical to experiences produced by temporal lobe epilepsy, by psychedelic compounds, and by oxygen deprivation, what exactly are you measuring? The presence of God? Or the capacity of your own brain to generate states of overwhelming significance and certainty when pushed beyond its normal operating conditions? The brain is extraordinarily good at producing feelings of absolute truth, of contact with something beyond the self, of meaning so intense it feels cosmic. It does this in dreams. It does this in fever states. It does this in psychosis. It does this on a mountain after 3 days without food. None of that proves God is absent, but it does prove that the feeling of God's presence tells us far more about the organ generating the feeling than about whatever might or might not be on the other side of it. Question 6. Why is religious belief most resistant to change where scrutiny is most discouraged?
God damn it.
This is a pattern you can observe without any theology at all. In communities where critical thinking about religion is actively discouraged, where children are shielded from alternative views, where doubt is treated as spiritual danger, belief is strongest and most stable. These communities produce the highest rates of lifelong faith, the most certain believers, and the most unified congregations. From the inside, this looks like proof of something real. Look how many of us believe. Look how confidently we believe it. But zoom out and the pattern tells a different story. In communities where open questioning is allowed, where exposure to other worldviews is encouraged, where education includes philosophy, history, and science, belief tends to become more nuanced, more flexible, and more frequently abandoned altogether. Not because education destroys meaning, but because it introduces the one thing a controlled belief environment cannot survive: comparison. Once you see your tradition as one option among many, once you understand the historical forces that shaped your scripture, once you learn that the certainty you feel was carefully constructed before you were old enough to evaluate it, the foundation shifts. Not always completely, but enough to matter. Here is the question that this pattern demands. If a belief were genuinely true, why would it require protection from competing ideas? Truth does not need a controlled information environment to survive. Gravity does not weaken when students study competing theories. Mathematics does not collapse when children are taught to question their assumptions. Real things hold up when examined. They get sharper, not softer. What gets softer under scrutiny is narrative. What requires shelter from outside information is not truth but identity. A system of meaning so deeply tied to belonging, family, and self-concept that exposure to alternatives feels less like an intellectual challenge and more like a threat to existence itself. And when faith is most concentrated precisely in the places where questioning is most dangerous, that is not evidence of divine power. That is a system revealing, without intending to, exactly what it is protecting and exactly why. Question 7. Why does the moral track record of organized religion look like any institution with unchecked power? This isn't about individual believers, who are often deeply good people. It's about the institutions. Given unchecked power, religious institutions have produced crusades, inquisitions, sexual abuse covered for decades, the burning of scholars, the silencing of women, the persecution of minorities, and the annexation of governments. This is not anti-religious propaganda. It is the documented historical record, much of it preserved and acknowledged by the institutions themselves. Now here is the uncomfortable comparison. Every single one of those outcomes also appears in the history of secular institutions with unchecked power. Governments commit genocide. Corporations poison communities and bury the evidence. Universities protect abusers. Armies commit atrocities and call them strategy. The pattern of harm is not unique to religion, which suggests the variable producing the harm was never the theology, it was the power. Specifically, power operating without meaningful accountability, without transparency, without the ability of those harmed to push back effectively. Give any human institution enough authority, enough insularity, and enough certainty that its mission justifies its methods, and the results look remarkably similar regardless of what the institution claims to believe. But here is where religion separates itself from every other category of institution, and this distinction matters enormously. When a government is caught committing atrocities, critics can challenge it on the grounds of its own stated values. When a corporation harms people, it can be sued, regulated, dismantled. When a university protects an abuser, journalists can investigate, legislators can intervene, and public pressure can force accountability. The institution has no ultimate defense against external judgment. Religious institutions claiming divine mandate operate differently. Criticism of the institution becomes, by design, criticism of God. Challenging the hierarchy feels to believers not like holding power accountable, but like attacking the sacred. Survivors who speak out are sometimes framed as threats to faith rather than witnesses to harm. The divine shield does not just deflect criticism. It reframes criticism itself as a moral failing in the person raising it. That is a protection no secular institution possesses. And it is precisely what makes unchecked religious power uniquely difficult to correct once it goes wrong. Question 8. Why do near-death experiences reflect the culture of the person having them?
Amen.
Near-death experiences are frequently offered as evidence of an afterlife, and they are remarkable, vivid, consistent within cultures, deeply meaningful to those who have them. People who have them are changed permanently. They report losing their fear of death, gaining clarity about what matters, feeling as though they briefly touched something more real than ordinary life. The experiences deserve to be taken seriously, not dismissed. But taking them seriously means following the evidence honestly, including the parts that complicate the conclusion most people want to draw. Here is what the cross-cultural research actually shows. The content of near-death experiences is not universal, it is cultural. Western Christians encounter tunnels, brilliant light, and figures consistent with their tradition, often Jesus, sometimes deceased relatives, in settings that feel unmistakably familiar. Hindus frequently encounter messengers of Yama, the god of death, and formal courts of judgment that match their own cosmology in specific and striking detail. East Asian accounts feature imagery rooted in their own traditions. Secular individuals, those without strong religious frameworks, tend to describe pure light, peace, or a sense of vast interconnection, but no religious figures at all. The experiences feel equally real to everyone having them. The certainty is identical across traditions, but the content keeps matching what each person was raised to expect from death. Now ask the obvious question. If these experiences were genuine contact with an objective afterlife, a real place or state that exists independently of human belief, why would its contents change depending on the cultural background of the person arriving there? Reality does not adjust itself to meet expectations. A mountain is the same mountain whether a Christian or a Hindu is climbing it. An objective afterlife should work the same way. What does adjust itself to meet expectations is the mind. Specifically, a mind under extreme physiological stress, deprived of oxygen, flooded with neurochemicals, drawing on its deepest stored frameworks to interpret an experience it has no prior template for. The near-death experience is real as an experience. That part is not in question. But as evidence of a specific religious afterlife, it faces a problem it cannot resolve.
Amen.
It confirms too many contradictory traditions simultaneously to confirm any single one of them. And a piece of evidence that proves everything equally proves nothing at all. Question 9. Why does faith require you to distrust the very mind you use to evaluate it? This is perhaps the most important question of all. Every major religious tradition, at some point, asks you to override your own reasoning in deference to revelation. Logic that contradicts doctrine is called pride. Evidence that challenges belief is called temptation. Doubt is reframed as a spiritual failure rather than an intellectual one. The questioning mind is not celebrated as honest. It is treated as dangerous, as a symptom of weakness, as something to be overcome rather than honored. And here is the move that deserves to be examined very slowly, because it happens so smoothly that most people never notice it. You are handed a set of claims about reality. Extraordinary claims about the origin of the universe, the nature of consciousness, the existence of an afterlife, the specific requirements for eternal salvation. Claims that, if made in any other context, would be evaluated using reason, evidence, and careful scrutiny. Then, embedded within those same claims is an instruction. Do not apply reason, evidence, or careful scrutiny to these particular claims. Your intellect is fallen. Your logic is limited. Your doubt is the enemy whispering. Trust the authority. Surrender the question. In other words, the one tool you possess for evaluating claims about reality is designated unreliable precisely at the moment it threatens to reach the wrong conclusion. That is not humility. Humility means acknowledging the limits of what you know. What this asks for is something different. It asks you to treat your capacity for critical thought as a liability rather than an asset, but only when that capacity turns toward the belief system making the request. Reason is welcomed when it supports the conclusion. It becomes dangerous the moment it doesn't. That is a closed loop, and closed loops are not the structure of truth. They are the structure of systems that cannot survive open examination and have found a way to make examination feel like betrayal. Consider what this looks like from the outside. If someone told you to invest your life savings in an opportunity, but warned you that any skepticism you felt toward it was actually a character flaw you needed to overcome, you would recognize that immediately as a manipulation. The warning against doubt is not a spiritual insight. It is a mechanism. It exists to protect the claim from the one process that could genuinely test it. The most honest question you can ask about any belief system is simple. Does it welcome scrutiny, or does it pathologize it? Does it get stronger when examined, or does it require you to stop examining? Because truth, actual truth, does not need you to weaken yourself to accept it. It asks only that you look carefully and follow what you find. If the only way to access something is to first agree to distrust your own capacity for critical thought, ask yourself clearly and without flinching who benefits from that agreement. Because it is not you. And it is almost certainly not truth. Question 10. Why is leaving treated like betrayal? There is one final pattern that ties everything together, and it is impossible to ignore once you see it. Why does leaving a belief system come with such a heavy price? Why does it cost people their community, their family, their sense of identity, and sometimes even their safety? These are not small losses. They are the foundations of a human life. Truth does not punish departure. Control does. When something is true, it does not need threats, shame, or exile to keep people inside. People remain because reality keeps confirming it. They stay because it holds up under questioning. They leave freely, and others are free to follow. But belief systems often react very differently. Leaving is framed as betrayal. Questioning is treated as disloyalty. Distance is interpreted as moral failure. And the punishment is not abstract. People are cut off. Relationships are strained or destroyed. Love becomes conditional on agreement. If belief were truly self-evident, no one would need to be shamed for leaving. No one would need to be warned about curiosity. The truth would speak for itself. Systems that equate disagreement with betrayal are not protecting truth. They are protecting themselves. And when belonging is conditional on belief, belief stops being about understanding reality and becomes about survival. These 10 questions don't dissolve meaning. They don't eliminate wonder. They don't leave a void where purpose used to be. What they do is shift the source. Meaning built on honest examination is more durable than meaning built on inherited certainty. A life examined is not a life emptied. It's a life owned. If these questions made you uncomfortable, that discomfort is not damage. It's the feeling of thinking clearly about something you were taught not to think about too carefully. That feeling is worth following. If you value truth over comfort, if you believe questions are more important than enforced answers, stay curious, keep thinking, and subscribe. Not for certainty, for clarity.
You've probably heard people say that losing a pet is like losing a family member. But if you've ever lost a cat specifically, you already know that description doesn't even come close. There's something else living inside that grief. Something quieter. Something stranger. Something that doesn't fully dissolve even after the months have passed and the world expects you to have moved on. You still catch yourself listening for them. You still glance at their favorite spot by the window. And sometimes, late at night, in that strange space between waking and sleeping, you feel it. A weight on the bed. A familiar pressure settling exactly where they always slept. You open your eyes. Nothing is there. But the feeling was real. You know it was real. Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. You are not imagining it. You are not crazy. And you are not alone. What you are experiencing has been reported by cat owners across centuries, across cultures, across continents. And according to Edgar Casey, one of the most documented psychic and spiritual researchers in modern history, there is a very specific reason why losing a cat feels different from losing any other animal. There is a very specific reason why cats seem to linger after death in a way that other pets simply don't. And there is a very specific reason why, if you've ever been chosen by a new cat after losing one, something about that new cat felt impossibly, unexplainably familiar. Edgar Casey discovered something about the spiritual nature of cats that the ancient world already knew and that modern science is only beginning to suspect. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear will change everything about how you understand your cat, your grief, and what is waiting on the other side. But before we go any deeper, I need to pause for just a moment for anyone watching this who is new to this channel. Welcome. This channel exists for one reason only: to explore the deeper spiritual realities that most people sense, but nobody talks about. We dive into Edgar Casey's readings, ancient wisdom traditions, near-death experiences, and the spiritual science of consciousness, grief, and what lies beyond physical death. If that is the kind of content that speaks to something in you, then do not leave this channel without hitting that subscribe button right now, and turn on your notifications. You do not want to miss what's coming. Now let's get into this. Before we can understand what happens to cats after death, we have to confront the question that religion, philosophy, and science have all danced around for centuries without giving a straight answer. Do animals have souls? The mainstream Western religious answer for most of recorded history has been a flat no. Animals are biological machines. They eat, they sleep, they die, and when they die, that is the end of the story. No soul, no afterlife, no continuation. Edgar Casey said that answer is completely wrong. According to Edgar Casey, spirit didn't just create human beings. Spirit pushed itself into all of matter, into minerals, into plants, into every living creature on this earth. The entire physical world, everything you can see and touch and smell, is spirit expressing itself in form. This was not a side note in Casey's readings. It was a foundational truth that everything else he taught was built upon. Edgar Casey said animals are not soulless machines. They are expressions of the divine in physical form, just as humans are. The difference is not whether they have a spiritual nature. The difference is what kind of spiritual nature they carry. And here's where it gets fascinating. According to Edgar Casey, the single most important distinction between a human soul and an animal soul comes down to one word: will. Free will. Casey's reading 9009 to 1 states clearly that the will is the factor that separates humans from the rest of the animal kingdom. Humans have individual souls equipped with free will, the ability to choose, to rebel, to create, to destroy, to grow in any direction, including directions that cause tremendous suffering. Animals, Edgar Casey said, operate through something different, something called the group mind, a collective spiritual intelligence that keeps animals in natural harmony with divine law. And here's the part that stops most people cold when they first hear it. That is not a limitation. That is a form of grace. Animals cannot sin. They cannot fall from grace. They cannot make the catastrophic moral choices that derail human souls for entire lifetimes. They exist in a state of natural alignment with the creative forces that humans spend centuries of spiritual evolution trying to recover. But Edgar Casey also revealed something else. Something that explains why your bond with your cat felt like more than just a pet relationship. Animals that live closely with humans, that are loved deeply, that share years of intimate daily life with the human soul, begin to develop something beyond the group mind. Something that starts to look, to the spiritual eye, less like a member of a species and more like someone. Your cat was never just a cat. And what happened to that someone after death is unlike anything else in the animal kingdom. Now here's the question at the very heart of this video. And I need you to stay with me closely here, because this is where everything starts to click into place. If all animals have a spiritual nature, and if animals that bond with humans develop individuality across lifetimes, then why does losing a cat feel so profoundly different from losing a dog? Why do cat people and dog people describe their relationships in such completely different terms? Why is the grief different? Why is the lingering different? Why does a cat's absence feel like a different kind of hole in the world? According to Edgar Casey, cats and dogs are traveling the spiritual path from completely opposite directions. And understanding that difference will unlock everything about what happens to your cat after it leaves its body. Edgar Casey described the human soul as being composed of 3 elements: spirit, mind, and will. Now apply that framework to animals, and something extraordinary becomes visible. Dogs are strongest in spirit, that pure, unconditional, overflowing love energy. A dog bonds with its human through total devotion. It gives itself to you completely, unreservedly, without condition. And according to Casey's framework, it is through that act of surrender, through that total giving, that a dog's soul develops its individuality. A dog doesn't arrive in your life as a fully formed someone. It becomes a someone through loving you. The more completely a dog gives itself to the relationship, the more distinct it becomes as a spiritual being. Dogs develop their souls through the heart. Cats are completely different. Edgar Casey discovered that cats are strongest in mind. That watchful, independent, sovereign, discerning consciousness. A cat doesn't surrender to you. It chooses you. And in spiritual terms, the difference between surrender and choice is enormous. Think about every cat you have ever known. Did any of them ever make you feel like they needed you the way a dog needs you? No. A cat arrives in your life with a pre-existing sense of self. That I am my own being quality that every cat owner recognizes immediately is not learned behavior. According to Edgar Casey, it is a spiritual characteristic. A cat brings its individuality to your relationship. It was already a someone before it ever set eyes on you. A dog grows its soul through your relationship. A cat's soul was already grown. It came to you already ancient, already self-possessed, already carrying something that feels less like devotion and more like wisdom. And this is precisely why the grief is different. When a dog dies, you feel like you've lost a heart, a warm, open, uncomplicated source of unconditional love. When a cat dies, you feel like you've lost a mind, a presence, an intelligence. Something that was quietly and independently observing your life from its perch on the windowsill and taking note of things you never even told another human soul. That presence, that sovereign, watchful, ancient intelligence does not simply dissolve when the body stops working. And what happens to it next is something Edgar Casey described in detail that will genuinely stop you in your tracks. Here is something Edgar Casey said that every cat owner hears and immediately recognizes as true, even if they've never had a word for it before. Cats do not live entirely in this dimension. Edgar Casey described the universe as being organized in layers: physical, astral, mental, spiritual, each layer interpenetrating the others, each operating at a different frequency of consciousness. Most physical beings, including most animals, are rooted almost entirely in the physical layer. Their awareness doesn't extend much beyond what their senses can detect in the immediate material world. Cats are different. According to Edgar Casey, cats naturally and consistently extend their awareness into what he called the astral plane, the dimension of emotions, dreams, energy, and discarnate spirits, the dimension where souls exist between physical incarnations, the dimension that is always present, always surrounding us, but that most human beings can only access in dreams or deep meditation. Cats access it while fully awake. Think about this. You've seen it yourself. Your cat's sitting completely still, staring at an empty corner of the room with dilated pupils and flattened ears, tracking something invisible across the ceiling with absolute focused attention, hissing at an empty doorway with a ferocity that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, suddenly bolting from a room for no reason you can detect. Edgar Casey said they are not hallucinating. They are perceiving. They are seeing, sensing, and responding to presences and energies in the astral dimension that your physical senses simply cannot access. Now here's why this matters so profoundly for understanding what happens after death. When a cat dies, it doesn't have to learn to navigate the astral plane. It has been navigating the astral plane its entire physical life. Every moment it spent staring at invisible presences was practice. Every time it tracked something across the ceiling that you couldn't see, it was staying fluent in a language most physical beings have completely forgotten. For a dog, death is a journey into unfamiliar territory. The dog has lived entirely in the physical dimension. It must adjust, adapt, learn to exist in a completely new form. That adjustment takes time and energy. For a cat, according to Edgar Casey, death is not a journey into the unknown. It is coming home. The astral dimension is a place the cat has been visiting its entire life. Death simply removes the physical body that was the only thing keeping the cat from being fully there. The cat doesn't cross over. It steps fully into the dimension it was always halfway inside. And from that dimension, it doesn't leave you. It watches, and the signs it leaves behind are unmistakable once you know what to look for. This is the part of the video I need you to pay very close attention to. Because Edgar Casey's framework, combined with what the broader metaphysical tradition has consistently described, outlines a specific, step-by-step process of what happens to a cat's soul after death. And if you have lost a cat, you may recognize phases of this process that you have already lived through without having any framework to understand them. Phase 1, the territorial lingering. Edgar Casey said that after death, a cat's soul essence stays near its home, near its territory, for significantly longer than virtually any other animal. And the reason is rooted in everything we've already discussed. Cats are not just physically territorial. They are energetically territorial. Your home was not merely a place your cat lived. It was your cat's kingdom, the space it patrolled, scent-marked, guarded, and presided over with absolute sovereign authority, not just physically but spiritually. When the body dies, the cat's astral presence does not abandon that territory. It continues to patrol it. It continues to claim it. It continues to maintain its watch over the space it considered its own. This is the phase when people most commonly report feeling the cat jump onto the bed at night, feeling the familiar paw prints walking across the mattress, feeling the weight settle into the exact spot where the cat always slept.
God damn it.
Look, nothing is there, but the sensation was completely, unmistakably real. This phase can last days. It can last weeks. In some cases, it can last months. Edgar Casey discovered that the strength and duration of this phase depends entirely on the strength of the cat's personality and the depth of the bond. The more sovereign the cat, the more powerfully it claimed its territory in life, the longer that territorial presence persists after death. If you have felt this, you are not imagining it. Leave a comment below and tell me. You will find that you are far from alone. Phase 2, the watchful withdrawal. Gradually, the intensity of the territorial presence changes. It doesn't disappear. It shifts. The cat's soul essence begins to withdraw from constant active patrolling and settles into something Edgar Casey described as oversight. Still present, still attentive, but watching from a greater distance. Checking in rather than standing guard. If Phase 1 feels like the cat is still in the room with you, Phase 2 feels like the cat is watching from the next room. The phantom sensations on the bed become less frequent. The peripheral glimpses grow rarer, but something else becomes noticeable. During moments of significant stress, illness, grief, or major life decisions, the presence suddenly intensifies. As if the cat noticed something important from its watch point, assessed the situation with that characteristic discernment, and deliberately moved closer. Cat owners who develop sensitivity to this phase often describe it using one specific word. Supervised, not controlled, guarded. The same energy the cat had in life when it sat on the highest shelf in the room and watched everything from above with one eye open. Phase 3, the conscious choice. And this is where cats diverge completely from almost everything else in the animal kingdom. When it comes time to return, to reincarnate, most animals flow through the process passively. The group mind generates a new expression into the physical world. The process is not consciously directed. Edgar Casey discovered that cats appear to exercise something much closer to deliberate choice. Not full human free will. Casey was clear that free will belongs to humans alone, but something adjacent to it. A selectiveness, a deliberation, a quality that can only be described as I will return when I decide to return, to whom I decide to return, and not a moment before. This is why dog owners go looking for their next dog. Cat owners are found. The cat appears in your life with the absolute confidence of a being that has already made its decision and is simply informing you of the arrangement. And many cat owners who have lost a beloved cat and later been chosen by a new one report something that stops them completely. The new cat knows things, individual things. It avoids the same spots the old cat avoided. It gravitates to the same sleeping positions. It carries specific quirks that are not breed typical, but are eerily, impossibly familiar. According to Edgar Casey, this is not coincidence. It is not wishful thinking. Animals travel with their human soul groups across multiple lifetimes. The bond you form with your cat doesn't end at death. It persists in the spiritual dimension, and when conditions align, it draws the essence back into a new physical form. Not with specific event memories, but with something deeper. The memory of the connection itself. Here is something that should make you sit up straight. Everything Edgar Casey described about cats, the multidimensional awareness, the territorial persistence after death, the deliberate reincarnation, the sovereign afterlife presence, none of it is new. The ancient world knew all of this. They didn't theorize about it. They built entire spiritual systems around it. The Egyptian goddess Batet, originally depicted as a fierce lioness and later as a domestic cat, was the sacred guardian of the threshold between worlds, between life and death, between the visible and the invisible. The Egyptians didn't worship cats because they were beautiful or useful. They worshiped cats because they recognized what Edgar Casey would later confirm in his readings. Cats exist at the boundary between dimensions. They perceive what humans cannot. And they guard the threshold between the physical world and whatever lies beyond it. Killing a cat in ancient Egypt was punishable by death, not because cats were cherished pets, because cats were considered spiritually essential. They were guardians of a boundary that if left unguarded could allow unwanted energies into the human world. The Japanese recognized the same truth in their concept of the supernatural cat. The Norse had Freya's cats pulling her chariot between realms. The Celtic traditions described cats explicitly as walkers between worlds. Every single culture that paid close and serious attention to cats arrived at the identical conclusion. These beings are not fully of this world. They have one paw in the physical dimension and one paw somewhere else entirely. Edgar Cayce's readings describe how animal souls evolve across incarnations, progressing from wild power toward domestic intimacy. Your house cat is the modern descendant, both physically and spiritually, of beings that once sat at the feet of priests and priestesses in the temples of Egypt, in the mystery schools of Mesopotamia, not as pets, but as colleagues, as fellow perceivers of the invisible world. This is why cats don't feel like pets. They feel like beings with secret knowledge who have simply agreed, for reasons of their own, to share your home for a while. And according to Edgar Cayce, that feeling is not your imagination. It is an accurate perception of exactly what they are. If everything Edgar Cayce revealed is true, then we should expect the afterlife communications of cats to be specific, consistent, and recognizable. And they are. Across cultures, across centuries, across thousands of grieving cat owners worldwide, the same signs appear again and again. Here they are. And pay attention, because there is a very good chance you have already experienced at least one of these and talked yourself out of believing it. Number 1, the phantom weight. This is the most commonly reported experience by a significant margin. You are lying in bed, usually at night, usually in the quiet space between waking and sleeping, and you feel it. The unmistakable sensation of a small animal jumping onto the mattress. The familiar pressure of paw prints walking toward the spot. The weight settling exactly where your cat always slept. You open your eyes. Nothing is there. This is the territorial presence Edgar Cayce described. The cat's sole essence continuing its nightly ritual, uninterrupted by something as minor as the death of a physical body. If this has happened to you, tell me in the comments. You need to know how many people share this experience. Number 2, the peripheral flash. You catch movement in the corner of your eye, the right size, the right color, moving at exactly the right height, in exactly the right direction, through exactly the path your cat always used. You turn to look directly. Nothing. Edgar Cayce said peripheral vision is less filtered by the rational mind, and therefore more honest about what is actually present. The cat's astral presence is subtle enough to register in peripheral vision, but disappears the moment your rational, focused attention turns toward it. Number 3, other animals confirm it. If you have other pets, watch them carefully in the weeks after a cat's death. Other cats especially will stare at empty spaces, track invisible movement with their eyes, sit in front of seemingly empty spots, and vocalize as if in conversation, groom the air where the deceased cat used to sit. They are not confused or grieving in a simple biological sense. They are perceiving, with their own multidimensional awareness, a presence that is still very much there. Their behavior is the most reliable external confirmation that what you are sensing is real. Number 4, the dream that isn't just a dream. When a deceased cat appears in a dream, according to Edgar Cayce, it rarely comes simply for comfort. A dog visit in a dream tends to be warm, emotional, overflowing with love. A cat visit is different. The cat appears, makes sustained and deliberate eye contact, and transmits something specific. A warning, a direction, a calm, compressed message that carries enormous meaning in a single look. You wake up not crying but knowing. That cool, quiet certainty rather than an emotional overflow is the feline signature, and it persists across the veil exactly as it existed in life. Number 5, the inexplicable scent. You smell your cat. Not a cat. Your cat. That specific combination of warmth and fur and the distinct personal scent that belonged only to them. It appears in a room with no logical source, often at moments of distress or deep thought. Edgar Cayce said scent is one of the most powerful carriers of emotional memory, and that a soul operating from the astral plane can project a presence that the physical senses translate as their specific scent. It is their way of saying, without words, I am here. I see you. You are not alone. Now here is the most important practical truth Edgar Casey left us on this subject. Do not chase your cat. Do not project desperate, clinging, needy grief into the universe expecting a response. Because Edgar Casey said cats, even deceased cats, do not respond to neediness. They never did in life. They do not begin after death. The way to connect with a deceased cat is the same way you connected with a living one. Be still, be quiet, create space, sit in their favorite spot, hold them in your mind with calm, clear, respectful love, not desperate grief. The same warm, quiet affection you showed them on an ordinary afternoon when you were simply sharing space together with no agenda and no need. Make yourself available, and then wait. They will come on their terms. Because sovereignty, Edgar Casey discovered, does not end at death. Your cat is not gone. According to Edgar Casey, and then wait. They will come on their terms. Because sovereignty, Edgar Casey discovered, does not end at death. Your cat is not gone. According to Edgar Casey, it shifted from the physical side of the threshold to the astral side. But it is still at the threshold, still watching, still guarding, still yours, in the only way a cat is ever anyone's. By choice. Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it. And if you'd like to go a step further in supporting this work, you can now leave a super thanks below. It's a small way to say thank you, and it truly helps keep this channel going.
Justice is not always so easy to discern. Genesis gives us a much more complex picture. In Genesis 34, for instance, a clear act of violence and injustice has been committed against Abraham's great-great-granddaughter, Dinah. Her brothers, Simon and Levi, take it upon themselves to avenge this great injustice. They do this by destroying an entire town for the sin of one man. Afterward, Jacob, their father, looks at this justice and is horrified. He says, "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land." And at the end of Jacob's life, Jacob blesses all of his sons except Simon and Levi. There, Jacob says, "Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel."
Do you ever just have so much to say you don't know where to start? Because that's how I feel after I watched this clip. And I wanted to understand the context more, like why is he even talking about this story? And sure enough, it comes from a longer video that is all about God's justice in the Old Testament. That's why this is crazy on like 3 different levels. The hypocrisy here is truly baffling, that someone can just say these things and think they're making a point when they are shooting themselves in the foot for the very nature of this God. But he put the short together, he decided to have it out there, and so insofar as I can see what he's trying to accomplish, I want to speak to that. I could be wrong, tell me if you get a different interpretation here, but it seems to me that he is sharing this story, especially in the context of the larger video, that God's justice can be hard to understand, but that here we get a really clear case of right and wrong. Because when the great-granddaughter of Abraham is raped, that's clearly wrong. But also, and this is where we get into a lot of like prescriptive versus descriptive, when we read the Old Testament, we are seeing that the sons of Jacob are doing something also wrong, because they punished an entire city for the sin of one man. Again, that's the hypocrisy I'm talking about, but we're going to get to that. And he ends the video by saying that Jacob is horrified and that he curses his sons, as if that is supposed to be showing us that yes, this evil does not stand. So God takes no part in this. He is completely absent from this story. But I don't see it in that framing. And so I want to share with you the full account of the Genesis 34 story here about Dinah. Because instead of taking the great man of God, Jacob who becomes Israel, patriarch Jacob, instead of taking him as some kind of moral beacon of light showing us that retaliation and lying are wrong, I want you to see everyone's motives in this story. So, to set the scene, let's use a little context. If we go back to Genesis 33, we can see that Jacob is returning to Canaan after trying to reconcile with Esau, but he is settling here in Canaan with some purchased lands next to Shechem. And then in 34:1, we get the beginning of the events. The young daughter goes out to visit the other women of the city. But it says that Shechem seized her and took her by force. So this is clearly rape. And then it kind of does something weird. I'll just read it to you. So the prince of the land saw her, he seized her, and he lay with her and humiliated her. But it's also clear to tell us, and his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke with his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." We have good reason to believe contextually that she would have been rather young. And I wanted to point out the contrast of seizing her and taking her by force and humiliating her with a longing for her and speaking tenderly to her and desiring her to be the wife, because this is the exact kind of excuses that we get whenever it's God's people doing this kind of thing. I'll talk about clear instances where God, through Moses, gives the command for the men to take the young virgins for themselves, captive brides, aka sex slaves. And the Christians just fill the comments with, "No, don't you understand, these men are dead." Yeah, because God ordered it. So these women need men. You don't understand the society back then. Yeah, sure I do. Women had no value. Part of that was set up by the God of Israel. You are definitely dependent when you can't own property, when you're worth less than a man, and when your biggest commodity is your virginity. But they never zoom all the way out to understand how did we get to such a context and a culture that we would even have to try to make this excuse. But the excuses do come that, the men are dead, these women would starve to death or be raped by someone else, so better that God brings them into his people. Look, he's assimilating them. Isn't it beautiful? They even wait 30 days of mourning. It's not that. It's to make sure that the woman doesn't have a child that's not theirs. They're getting through a cycle. That's it. But just because there's some flowery language or the idea of marriage is associated with it doesn't all of a sudden make up for rape. And Christians can see that so clearly, I'm sure, when we talk about this verse. Why can't we have consistent standards for the God of the universe? But what do we know will most likely happen next in this culture, in this time, when a young girl has been raped? Will we care about the trauma of that young girl? Will we even hear her voice in the story? No. Will we move straight to negotiations between the men because their property has been devalued? Yes. So again, God is not active in the story, but the rules that he has set up are. Now again, those rules were for the Israelites, and they are now dealing with their foreign neighbors, who, guess what, seem to think just like them. Isn't that interesting? God says that he chose his chosen people and was going to set them apart, that by his high standard we would be able to know them. But part of that standard is what happens when a woman is raped. And it's for the man who did it to marry her and compensate the father for his property loss. Doesn't seem to be so elevated and set apart when the horrific Canaanite neighbors are doing the exact same practices. Amen. And Hamor, by the way, are Hivites, just to be clear. But again, residing around the areas of Canaan and not part of the original chosen people. So Shechem, that did the rape, is telling his father, "Hey, you know what? I really liked her when I was humiliating her and taking her virginity, so I want her to be my wife, okay?" Hamor is seeing dollar signs. This is a chance to co-align with Jacob. We see the selfish motivation a few times if you just read the text instead of the quick recap that this guy gives to make his agenda point. You know what else having this kind of law does? It encourages, if you want to get closer ties to another family, if you do see a girl that you want to be your wife, just rape her. Force everybody's hand. But that God of perfect foresight apparently didn't see that one coming. But let's just read so you can hear again the motivations. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves.
Stupid!
And the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it, and get property in it." Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes,